Hello, 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 ladies, gents, and everything else in between. This is Silas. I'm back with Steven. I'm back here, starting something new with my friend Steven. Say what's up, Steven.
I hope you're all doing well. Today we're going to finally do videos that are more food related. It's something that a bunch of people have been talking to me about for some time. People keep saying you should do food related videos. You're a culinary guy. You eat out all the time. Why don't you talk about food on your YouTube channel? And it's not my YouTube channel, it's Silas's, but obviously we collaborate on things. So I thought,
Yeah,
why not? Let's do videos featuring restaurants that I like to go to and that I've been to several times. So, a little bit about my culinary background for those who don't know. I wanted to be a chef for a very long time, up until maybe like my mid 20s or so. I did a vocational program in high school, a culinary arts program. I went to the Culinary Institute of America after high school. I graduated late 2009, moved to New York City here shortly thereafter. I worked. My first job was at Bar Boulud. That's Daniel Boulud. It was one of his at the time newer places. Then I worked at Seasonal. It was a very nice Austrian place with a Michelin star. I worked at Eddie and the Wolf, the other Austrian place. I worked at Batello. It's a nice place in Jersey City. That was when I decided I didn't want to work in the kitchen, so I went to front of the house. From there, I went to Netta, the sushi restaurant, and then from there, I went to Felidia, which was my last job. And now I'm dabbling in finance and other things, but that's just my culinary career.
yeah. This man says dabbling, but he's been doing pretty well by himself, and also he's done pretty well in the food industry, and he's very I won't say informed, but at least from what I've heard from him and just knowing him as a person, he seems like a really great guy. And you see his career, he's actually come up in there and he's come up in the industry. And he's one of the guys who started from the start. So for me personally, I've been cooking since I was a kid. I remember my mom used to tie us in like a lesso, which is those like kind of African kangaroo cloth type thing or whatever. And she used to just carry us in the kitchen while she was cooking. And that's something that she's always done. And just coming up, even when I was even middle school and around that age, I already started doing basic meals where it would help. And then by the time I was in high school, my brother and my sister and I, my sister's 5 years younger than me, she's also got another thing, cibo tamo, which is like food, tasty in Italian. I'll leave links below. My brother is also, he's a few years old. He's about 2 years older than me. He also cooks and things like that. But we'd all have a few days in the week where we'd actually do the entire meal or we'd help in other meals in it. So that's been part of my background. I've been really interested in food, and having a friend like Steven who can actually tell me more details about the actual industry itself, which is somewhat separate from just being able to cook at home, has been very interesting to me. So just some of the conversations that we've had based on it, we're hoping we'll be able to come and bring that on this platform. Now, we're still working out how we're exactly going to go about this. I've been doing a thing called Chefing It Up for a while. Like there's also a Chefing It app on Instagram. Again, there will be links below. We're thinking this might be something we might pull out to a separate channel or just do this thing together. And we're working on this. And maybe also just set up a template so other people can also join in this conversation, because most of the central thing in the conversations that we have is just about increasing people sharing information. And I think that just makes the world a better place. We're going to appropriate some of the information that we have about the nutrition that we've appropriated into ourselves, and we're sharing that with you. And then you guys can also tell us things about the things that you've eaten, the things that you cooked, the places that you've been. And we can just kind of share these ideas, and maybe might get to a point where we're actually doing cooking shows where we do little things. We try to make some of these meals that we've had, or try to go in and actually talk about the actual histories of how certain things are made. And I think the first series that Stephen and I had on this channel, on this location that you have, is the You Are What You Consume series.
Mm-hmm.
And that series was just talking about different things food related. And You Are What You Consume to me is more than just the physical food, because literally your body, and this is something you see with a baby, like the baby comes out. Whatever you're eating, your baby's actually eating when you're gestating. But the baby comes out. The baby's just drinking milk for, it's supposed to be the first 6 months. We're just consuming that milk. And those milk molecules from the mother are literally building up the baby. Whatever you eat literally is the building blocks of your body. Like you eat just broccoli, your body's literally converting whatever the matter of broccoli is into yourself. But then now you take it further, and the things you consume are not just the foods. It's also the culture, it's also ideas, it's also thoughts, it's also these feelings. Those are other things that make the human beings human beings. So we want to go more into that with the food. And not just simply talk about, oh, this tastes good, this tastes that, but also go into what are the things around the food? How do some foods come to be? Why do some places have certain kind of cuisines? Why do some places just have normally just regular fare? What are the cultural things that go behind certain foods being made? Like just due to some cultural things, imagine if they didn't have the taboo of eating pork in the Middle East, in mostly Arab states, in Muslim majority states. Those places have certain cuisines, but in the cuisines that they've developed there, let's say you took away that aspect of having pork, you can actually eat pork. Which are the pork meals that you can actually bring into that style of cuisine and put it, or is there something intrinsic about that cuisine that excludes the pork? So these are the kind of things that I have in mind that hopefully we can start getting more into those kind of things, and we'll just work this out with Stephen as we go. And yeah, anything else you want to say about just the general thoughts and talks that we've been having about this?
Sure. Well, again, thanks for the praise. It's funny because there's sort of this joke. Like when I met two of my friends, I met them originally online, then we met in the city. Both my friend Raymond Rad and Kirsten, who you know. Somehow the conversation went off on me rambling about food, and they're like, "Wow, you really love food, don't you?" And like, and that, but that's how I am. It's like my interests are very few, but like I delve deep into them, and of course, food has been one, and it has been for a big part of my life, and especially living here. I mean, there's so many great places to eat at, and I thought what part of the reason I sort of wanted to do this style for the food, at least to start, is that I really do enjoy these restaurants. And I thought, well, why don't I give them a shout out? Why don't I showcase some of their food? Why don't we elaborate on some of the techniques? And, you know, I mean, hopefully people will see some of these dishes and feel inspired. Maybe they can make them that try and duplicate them or make something similar. And as Silas has said, hopefully just increase the average person's awareness and understanding of food.
Yeah, because there's so much out there that's one thing that's been rather it's somewhat. I know with some things, like I just recently made lasagna for I think the second time I'd made lasagna. The first time I made it was when I was still living in San Francisco for like Thanksgiving some time back. But certain dishes, lasagna, the basic thing is a sauce, some sort of starchy, meaty type of thing, protein based thing, and then some kind of layering thing. Now it doesn't have to be pasta, it's normally pasta, you can use quinoa, all these things, but that's the basics. But from those simple basic sauce, some kind of roughage or some meaty thing, some proteiny thing, and layers, you can build so much on that. There's so many different ways to do that. And some of those meals like lasagna, I think in my mind, like, oh man, when I was living by myself, I'm like, if you're living by yourself, making a one-person lasagna, buying all those ingredients that you want to make a really good lasagna is kind of tough. But I understand with certain meals where you're like, okay, I'll go to a restaurant because of the amount of effort it takes to actually make this. Yeah. It makes sense to have somebody else do it. But it's really been something that even still to today is rather surprising to me how many people could starve with a pantry full of food just because they can't cook basic meals. So that's something that I think even just the basic things, people need to understand, just learn the basics. And then from those basics, you can build up to some of these meals, some of these dishes that we're going to be talking about that might be more complicated in your mind. But this is still something, if you have those basics, you can start building up on that. And also some of these things that you think might be so complicated, you might find actually doesn't really take that much to actually prepare it. It might just be something with the details that Stephen will get into about the right temperature, hitting it at the right time, keeping the food in the right way, the preparation aspect of that, the following the recipes to the right. That's another thing. People can't follow recipes. That's so weird to me. but you'll find with some of those, and then also try to understand how did some things come from just something simple that somebody was just making in their home, and then now it turned into some really top, like Michelin 3 or 5, like 3 stars. It's 2 stars the highest. Isn't it 3 stars?
No, Michelin, it goes 1 to 3. It's okay, Michelin is 1. Yeah.
So some of these things could just have started from just somebody was just making them. Some guy in the woods of Ireland was just making some dish, and then now it's like a Michelin star thing. So with some of these times, we'll be trying to find different kind of interesting food journeys. I personally have taken in so much information online, watching like the Anthony Bourdains, watching things on the Food Network, just basically how it's made, watching how like the machines make like potato chips and like cheese puffs and things like this. It's been something very interesting to me. I personally have a bit of an issue being a recovering obese person. I used to make this joke like, oh, like there's no way I could be this obese without actually cooking myself. That would be kind of like a selfish thing. But then a lot of people are obese without cooking. So that was just a kind of macabre joke I was making at that time. But that's been something that I've been really interested in food even when I'm getting in better diets, and that helps me, I'm able to actually pick better foods because I have better knowledge about it, pick better ingredients, pick better actual nutrition, understand the foods, what they are, and that understanding that you have of what you're actually consuming will, I think, make you a stronger person, make you a better person, because you're going to make better decisions in the actual diet that you have, and just be more knowledgeable about how connected and how useful, what this is doing to your body, what your body needs, what other bodies needed when they were doing this thing, the places that this is an extra value, I think, by actually understanding some of these things. But yeah.
Definitely. Well, I was going to say, I really love the Ferdinand Point quote. For those who don't know, Ferdinand Point, he was a chef in France during about World War II, kind of that era. He mentored Paul Bocuse, who passed away. I'm trying to think if it was like a year or two ago. And then he mentored Daniel Boulud, who I used to work for. And Point was this huge guy. I remember they said he used to eat foie gras and brioche sandwiches and drink a magnum of champagne to himself every day. He died at like 40, as you can imagine. But he famously said, he said, never trust a skinny chef, because if he's skinny, how good can his food be?
Yeah. I mean, there is some things out there, so we'll try to insert some of these little interesting asides. And Stephen definitely has a lot of food knowledge crammed into.
Well, I was gonna say interest. I have a lot of interesting asides too.
Yeah, he's not someone who's just in the industry just to cash a paycheck. It was something where I think it was one of those situations where not necessarily just a passion. I think that's overused, and people are like, oh, it's a passion, but it's more. This is something Stephen will be doing. Like right now, he said he's gone more into finance, but he's still interested in the food industry. This is something that I think it's something that he would do even if there was nobody else listening. If we just like he mentioned when he talks to his friends, when we talks. So it's not something that we're doing. Oh, this is something we're doing, putting on a show. But we will also be trying to streamline this in a certain way. I know there's a lot of food-related content out there, and there's certain reasons why people take things in certain ways. Like, for example, when I read recipes, I really enjoy that now they finally put in some things where they say jump to recipe at the start, because sometimes it's going to be like paragraphs and paragraphs, like probably what we've done right now. We've been talking for like 10 minutes about random stuff before we get into the actual food. But you see that with the recipes, and I know some of that's like search engine optimization. It's also majority of the people who are going to demographics tell me a lot of housewives or women in a certain age range who are more interested in the whole back and forth, or the getting to know the person who's cooking. So there is some of those aspects in there, and we'll kind of get this. This is something that we're starting right now. We're just freestyling the recipe of this meal, of this section. We don't even know the name of it yet, what we're exactly going to be calling it. But we're still freestyling right now. We're going to figure out certain dishes. We're going to figure out certain appetizers of this. It might be just a few posts that we post up. The main meals, we might divide it to like, okay, we're focusing on this one meal on a particular thing, or some things might be desserts, or just more just like the Instagram random things, or just little things. So we'll figure that out as we go. I hope you bear with us. Thank you very much for choosing to come and listen to what we're saying here. Anything else you want to say, Stephen, before we get into the main part of this?
Same thing. Hope you enjoy. And of course, feel free to leave any feedback, suggestions, if there's any related commentary, if there's any restaurants that you'd like us to talk more about. Maybe I can go check them out. I think any feedback, I'm happy to hear it, even if it's criticism.
And that is specifically in New York City, because that's where he is now. Maybe if anybody knows any restaurants in Nairobi that they might have heard of, I'll start looking around and go into some places. Most of the stuff, as I mentioned, I cook myself, so I might start highlighting and discussing certain Kenyan or certain traditional meals that they have here. And there's also a pretty decent restaurant scene in Nairobi, so I might just start also going out and try to find a few places here and there that I can go in and highlight those and bring those to the table as well. And we'll grow. I think we've already talked about some things. We have some interesting things in mind. If this is something, there are things that we want to do anyway, so we want to find a way to package it and also have it be profitable, the capitalists that we are. Okay.
And have fun in the process too.
Yes.
This is definitely All right.
Okay, so the first one we're going to go with is this one. We're going to be talking about Minetta Tavern, which is a place that Stephen has been to. There's about 11 dishes here. We're going to be going over some appetizers, some entrees, and then one dessert. And we'll just kind of go through by the plate. I'm going to be putting them up on the screen as we discuss them. And Stephen's just going to tell us a little bit about them, and I'm going to just ask him some questions, and we'll just freestyle it for now based off of that general outline. And bear with us.
So I was just going to start off by saying a little bit about Minetta Tavern itself.
Yeah, oh,
So
it's
it's
good.
one of my it's one of my favorite restaurants. It's located on McDougal Street, and there's actually a little side road called Minetta Lane. It's right near the West Fourth subway stop. If you want a landmark, there are those basketball courts. There's a McDonald's, and there's that foreign films theater. It's like a block over from that, basically. I also used to work at Netta, which was on West 8th Street, so that's like a few blocks up. I hung out in that area a lot when I was working at Netta, and since then, it's an old school French place. It opened in 1937. It has a lot of it has like a 1950s style decor, kind of old school, but it works just because it's been around a while. It's kind of a landmark. Like you wouldn't open a place like that now, but because it's been around and it has the reputation, it works. And last I saw, they have one Michelin star. I don't know if they retained it, but they had 1 star for a while. I know that. So.
Oh.
Uh.
And about how many tables is it? That's how they normally do the size, right? They say like tables for restaurants.
Yeah, I would have to check the cover count. I don't know. It's funny. Every time I've come in, I just sit at the bar by myself because like I've talked about coming in with other people, but usually I'm alone and there's usually a seat at the bar, so I just sit there. I'm not sure. I would have to see how many seats it has. It's not a huge place. It gets busy though. It's one of those like even if you come early on, there's already people sitting, so it's a popular restaurant for sure. Yeah.
Okay, good. And when is the first time you went there? When did you first find out about it?
A few years ago, I would have to check back. I'm trying to think. Maybe I don't know if I was at Eddie and the Wolf for seasonal, so that would have been maybe like 2011, 2012, 2013, something like that. And I ate there like once, and I came back sometime later. I wasn't making a lot of money, so I couldn't afford it. But of course, financially, I'm in a better place now, so I've been going more frequently. It is very rich food. I mean, I love it personally, but it's one of those I'll get 1 or 2 things, and that's it because it's a lot to eat, and it's probably stuff I shouldn't be eating all the time either.
Yeah, and here he's meaning rich in like the actual content of it, the flavors and the taste, not necessarily just the price. But we'll also figure out the price range. I think one thing people normally listen is they normally say like the number of dollars. I think when I normally see it, it goes from like $1 to $2 to $3 to $4, a range of the actual cost. So we'll try to be including that in some of the restaurants that we go to. So the first one here, I think we'll just get into it.
Sure.
So we're going to start with the appetizer. The first one that we're going to be going over is the country pate, which is a frise, a prune cooked in Armagnac. I'm saying that right. There's going to be a lot of. There will be some times when there's going to be some pronunciation. So the country pate, it's a frise prune cooked in Armagnac, whole grain mustard, and cornichons.
Cornichon.
Cornichon.
It's cornichon. It's French, yeah.
So Minetta Tavern, did you mention if this is it fully French or is it a fusion? What is?
The style is mostly French. We'll get into it. There's actually some old school French dishes which you don't see too often anymore. I don't think it's strictly that though. Like I saw, for example, they have a lunch menu. Like they had like a lobster roll for lunch, and they do other things too. So it's not strictly French, but it's in general that sort of style of cooking. So if you're familiar with French food, especially higher end French food, you'll see a lot of things you'd recognize. And like I say, some old school dishes too that I honestly haven't seen since culinary school, which is kind of interesting.
Cool. Yes. Do they have does Minetta have a recipe book that people can get, or is that not one?
I don't think so. I don't think so, actually. That would be a good idea, but I don't think they've done one because their menu, it's one of those things where I think there's a few staples that they keep and then everything else just sort of changes accordingly. Like they have specials. Usually the specials will change each day. Like this pate here, that was actually a special the other day. So usually they'll make a few pates, like a few loaves worth, and then they just run them out. And then when they're out, they just take it off the menu. I think things like that. I saw they had frog legs recently too, but it was on a day that I wasn't there, so I didn't get to try them.
Okay, cool. So tell us about this country pate then.
Sure. So for those who don't know, a pate, it's a cold dish, usually based in pork, or there's pork in it at very least. There's different styles. My first job in the city here, Barbeloup, it's famous for its charcuterie. Danielle actually worked with a charcutier in Paris. His name is Gilles Verreau, and together they put a lot of charcuterie on the menu. So they had all these different pates and terrines there. A terrine is a little different. A terrine usually it's more there's usually different meats. It's usually a bit leaner. There's usually more gelatin holding it together. Whereas pate, it's more pork and usually the pork fat. The way you prepare it is you typically mix the pork, spices, other things. You put it in like a ceramic loaf pan. You put the loaf pan in a water bath and you bake that in the oven. And it's the idea is that the heat from the water, that's what cooks it. But it's a very precise thing because it's one of those like if you hit it too hard with like too much heat, it'll seize up and then the pate is tough, but too little and it's undercooked. And that was an issue at Bar Balut. I remember like some of the pates they had one of them actually cooked through all the way. So there's issues like that. Um but then But then the challenge is, like I say, getting it exactly right because it's the same thing like with the terrines with gelatin. If there's too much gelatin, it seizes up and then it's like you're biting into rubber, but too little, it falls apart. And then there's also the issue of if you put vegetables in, the moisture affects how well it holds together. So you don't want to cook the vegetables too much because it falls apart, but you want to cook them through all the way. It's a very precise thing. It's one of those charcuterie we learned how to make it in school, but like it's very hard to get exactly right. It kind of goes to what you were saying earlier about it's fundamentally simple, but getting those details exactly right is key. Like it's not as easy as it looks.
Yeah, I think another thing we might try to do that might be interesting with this one is to do like different like when you do certain games and you're doing certain challenges and you actually go on there's like different levels. It's like this is a B class, this is an A class, C class, it's an S, this is an SS. So I think we might try to do that, do the difficulty level of different different dishes, and I think with the pate would be rather more of a higher difficulty things, at least in the preparation, but maybe not necessarily getting the ingredients that you can do it because you can make pates with a lot of different things. In fact, this is one of the things where you can do like the kind of whole hog type of thing. You can use certain pieces of the meat or the whatever foods that you're eating that are not normally just as desirable as just themselves that you can actually include in a pate and get some really interesting tastes and flavors and uses out of that, right?
Yeah, I was going to say that as far as the cost of ingredients of this is very low. I mean, you just need pork. Usually, sometimes there's dairy in it, spices. Like I say, some use vegetables, but that's more in terrines. So, like the cost of ingredients is not that much, and you just need a water bath and ceramic pan. But it's a technique of getting it exactly right that's a challenge, and it does take a bit of time and experimentation to get exactly right. Once I have a bigger place in a kitchen, I might experiment with some of this on my own. Probably just share the pate with people though, because a whole loaf is kind of a lot of meat to eat. So
yeah, and that's one of the things that I was thinking. Like one of the things that we've talked about before in the You Are What You Consume series, and also this is kind of good to come to this because I think the last one, the You Are What You Consume series, was a discussion with Stephen that was right before. It was towards the start. It was about almost a year ago, a year and a few months ago, maybe. Right before as New York City might have been reopening, and we were talking about the restaurants there. So that's kind of interesting to go from that one, and then now in here, now the restaurants are opening up again, the ones that are still there, and Stephen now is going back out into the world and going to be telling us about more of the. You said it was the food capital or restaurant capital of the United States.
Yeah, some would say the world, but I mean, the French, of course, would argue against that. The British would argue against that. Tokyo is great too. Everybody says not just Japanese food, but I mean, Joël Robuchon, the French master, he opened a place there, and I know there were a few other French chefs who opened places there. So I hear great things about Tokyo too. So I mean, as far as the U.S., you could sort of debate about Northern California versus here, because I remember I had a friend who actually said he thought in terms of high-end restaurants, Northern California had way more and better ones, but because the way it's like they're kind of spread out, whereas New York, everything's condensed. So it's like people just associate, all these restaurants are here, whereas California, you have to drive miles apart to get to each one. So it's a little different. Yeah.
Okay.
Sure. All right.
Yes. Okay.
So
go ahead.
As far as this dish goes, I don't have a ton else to say about this. There was some toast too, which I didn't picture. I don't think it's really necessary. Frise is the lettuce on top. It's a bitter green. It kind of goes well with the pork. Pate is typically served with mustard. Sometimes a fruit condiment. What we did here was prune cooked in Armagnac. Armagnac, for those who don't know, it's a sweeter cognac, so it kind of gives it some more flavor. Also, the pickles, the cornichon, the little pickles, they tend to be pretty sour. That tends to go because again, the pork is rich and fatty. So it's supposed to be things that sort of contrast that. And what you can do is, you can eat this in different ways. You can just do the pate with some of the fruit. You could do the pate with some mustard and the cornichon, depending what you like. But the idea is just stronger flavored things against sort of the rich fattiness of the pork. The pork itself still has good flavor, obviously, but you need something to sort of counterbalance it. Sure.
Okay, so that's what I was going to ask about the toast, because I think that's how pate is. Like in my mind, that's how it's usually served. I remember the liver pate when I was a kid in France. That was a very common thing that we used to have, and it was on the nice French bread, like the different kind of breads that you had there. So with this, is it a kind of thing where I know with sushi, at least how some sushi, the sushi rolls are supposed to. You can eat food however you want. Let me not say, but there's a certain special way of eating food. But there's some suggested ways of eating certain things. With sushi, I know with I think it's the ginger. It's supposed to be a palate cleanser between meals. It's not like, I know for some people they prefer to actually just put the wasabi in the soy sauce, then put a slice of that ginger on the actual roll, and then dip it in and eat it that way. But the suggested way is supposed to be you take the ginger roll after you've had the slice of ginger after you've had the roll, right? It's supposed to be like a bit of a cleanser of sorts. So is there some kind of suggested way? Are you supposed to have, like, maybe you put a bit of the mustard on the bread, then you put a piece of the pate and you taste it that way, and then you taste it with each one of the different thing, with the prune, and then with the no, is that the cornichons, the green bean looking things?
Yeah, they're pickles. Yeah, it's a type of pickle.
Okay.
It's funny because they look almost like gherkins, but they're actually sour. They're not sweet because, again, the acidity is supposed to go against the fattiness. To answer your question, as far as I've heard, I haven't heard any ways you're supposed to. My understanding is just those components in general are recommended because for the reasons I described. Now, it's interesting you bring up sushi. I mean, maybe we can do a separate thing on that, but I remember my old GM who was Japanese actually complained that Americans put too much soy sauce on the sushi, like how they dunk it. He was saying you're supposed to lightly brush it because the idea is, think of soy sauce like salt. Like, you don't dump something in salt and then eat it. That's way too much. You put a little bit to accentuate the flavor. So things like that. And I think in the case of the charcuterie, it just kind of depends on the palate of the person. Like, somebody like my dad loves mustard and like the sour stuff, so he'd probably have more. But then somebody like me, I'd like a little bit to accentuate it. Then some people just might want the fruit. But I think it's up to the person. I don't know that there's a recommended way per se.
And another thing, when you cook in the alcohols, the alcohol still remains in the thing, but it's normally such a small amount that it's not really significant.
It's cooked out,
going to. Well, the alcohol leaves. I thought the alcohol remains in the thing. That's one thing I've never really had in my mind. Because sometimes you go and like.
It's cooked out to a degree. It depends on the thing. Like, we'll probably get into it below, but like certain like red wine sauces, you actually reduce it by a lot. And the idea is that it still retains certain characters that the wine has, but it doesn't taste like raw alcohol. Because the problem is, if you just were to put like dump wine into a sauce or something at the end, the sauce would just taste like wine, like it would overpower the other things. So the idea is you cook out some of the alcohol so it kind of balances out, but it still has some of the characters of the wine. Yeah.
But the alcohol itself evaporates during the cooking process?
Some of it does, yeah. Probably not 100%, but a lot of it, yeah.
Okay. So if we're done with that one, move to the next one.
Sure.
Okay, the next one is roasted bone marrow with baguette soldiers and shallot confit.
Yep. Okay. So this is one of my favorite items. I get it there all the time. The way they typically prepare the roasted bone marrow is you have to soak it. I want to say I think it's in salted water. You soak it in water. I'm trying to remember if people put salt in the water. I forget. But the idea is it draws out the impurities because the bone marrow itself has a lot of impurities that need to be pulled to the surface. And the way you typically prepare it after that is usually put salt on it. You usually put it in the broiler, hit it with the heat, and then it cooks it very nicely. I'm sort of been torn on how to describe bone marrow. It's almost like a meteor butter. It's almost like a meteor butter or something. Like, it's kind of like butter, but like it holds together a little better, but it's rich. I mean, it is pretty fatty stuff, but kind of in that. I'm trying to think of how to describe it. I mean,
that is a tough one, actually.
Meaty butter is one comparison people have made. I mean, it's not butter exactly, like it won't fall apart, but I was going to say, to add on to sort of the last point, the shallot confit here, Barbaluda actually had the same thing. What it is you cut up shallots, you brunoise them, you cut them into very tiny pieces. You simmer them in usually red wine and also port. So it's like red wine that's sweet and red wine that's drier. Usually put some herbs in. I used to do thyme, rosemary. You can do garlic and other things. You cook it down, and the shallots just cook in the wine and they simmer down. And then if there's any left, you sort of strain that off so there's like a little bit remaining. And then you just sort of you put the you pull out a piece of the marrow, put it on the toast, and then you put some of the shallot confit and eat it together. It's very nice. At Barbaloo, there was actually a beef cheek terrine that actually had the shallot confit on it. It was nice.
Okay. So the shallot confit is the one here in the little metal dish on the side of the image, right? Okay.
Yep.
And is that garlic on the baguettes, or is there any butter or anything put when they toast them, or it's just the baguette soldiers? Why soldiers?
It's just because they're longer and thinner. So it's like you cut instead of like with it's not pictured above, but with the pate, it would be like a little like rounder piece. But with this, it's like they cut it on a bias, so it's like a longer, thinner slice. So like a soldier standing up. Yeah. There's a little, usually they do a little clarified butter and some salt just to give it a little bit of flavor. And then they put that in the broiler for a second to toasty and put it on the plate.
Yeah. Now, you see, this is another thing where I think there may be a majority of Americans, and that's most of the people who listen to our content, but might have never actually had the bone marrow. Now that you're thinking, like, I really can't think of a good way. Because, for me, I don't even know if there's really that much bone marrow in the way that most chicken and things like that are cooked. They're not cooked, but definitely the way they're raised. Those Purdue chickens, there's a lot of boneless meat that people normally eat in the States. Like, people are more used to having chicken breasts in the States in general than actual meat on bone. So there's many people who might never actually come across, let alone actual, like, when this was from the beef, right? This is a cow.
Yep.
So what leg, what bone was this?
I'd have to check, but I think it's the leg bones. It's like they're usually the shin part, and I think what they do, they split them down the middle. So what it is when they butcher them, they get like a bandsaw or something, run it through, and then they have the pieces. They usually freeze them so it holds together, and then when you pull it out, that's when you put it in the water, and it
Oh yeah, I wonder. Yeah, because if you cut it after you've cooked it, it's probably not going to be. There might be like bone pieces inside the marrow and things like that.
Yeah,
I don't know.
Yeah.
And I'm trying to think of a good way, because I remember as a kid we used to break apart the bones of chicken and suck the marrow out of it, and we still on a regular basis when we get different cuts of meat from the butcher, you can actually go get bones, but typical things that we'll get like goat and certain cuts of the roast goat or the stewed goat, you will have that and like you will suck the marrow out. It's tough. Maybe I'll keep thinking about it and see, like what you said, the meaty butter. That might be, but there's no actual meat in it. So you're saying more the flavor is kind of meaty, but then butter itself would melt. Because if you had butter at the temperature you can get marrow in, because marrow can be warm and it still maintains its...
It is hot. It's served hot.
Yeah,
but
it maintains its thing.
Because I was gonna say when it's cold, it's almost like butter texture wise. But when you cook it, it softens a bit, but it doesn't it's almost like, it's not really softened buttery. I'm trying to think of like texture wise what to compare it to. It's like,
maybe a bit like avocado, like a nice ripe avocado.
More in that direction,
buttery,
like it'll fall apart, but it won't like melt everywhere.
Yeah,
if you were to get it super hot, it would melt everywhere, but it's not like butter. Like if you were to put butter up into a broiler, it would be a mess right away. It can take the heat for a bit, but if you were to blast it, it would be gone.
Because even if you took like even cold butter, frozen butter, just regular room temperature butter, and put it in your mouth, it melts. Yet it feels the marrow is more of breaking apart. It doesn't necessarily melt. So it's tough. If anybody out there is listening to this that has a good, what's your best description to explain the mouthfeel, I guess, of marrow? But I can't necessarily. But I definitely suggest you try it. I'll give a warning because it might seem a little queasy to some people because it might be a bit different of a taste. As we've mentioned, it's tough for us to actually think of something. There's very few things in my estimation that taste like it. Maybe this might be a good one. If you've ever had like overcooked noodles where they're kind of slimy a bit.
I mean, I get what you're saying. The problem is if you describe that to somebody and say, go eat this, they're not going to.
So don't eat that. But like maybe like soggy noodles or something. I don't know. But
that's like certain beef dishes, like the way they're structured, it's almost like stringy, but it's not like fibers get stuck in your teeth, but we would say in restaurants we used to say it was flaky or something. Like it's not really flaky the way you think of it, but it's like if you say stringy, people picture like fibers stuck in your teeth and they won't eat it. So
Okay, how about we're working on this. By the time we get a few episodes into this, we'll find more appetizing ways to talk about things. But how about something like a soft-boiled egg?
Similar, I guess.
Soft-boiled egg, maybe.
Sort of. Well, I would add the difference between this and butter is that the protein content of marrow itself is higher. That's why, because butter is almost all fat. Same with foie gras, which we're going to get into below. So if you put foie gras like in the oven, it's just going to run everywhere. But this, because there's protein, it congeals to a point, but still a lot of fat, and the fat is what melts with the protein congeals. But because they're together, that's why the texture is different. So if that can help you visualize a little bit, I guess.
Yeah. Now, I think in the United States of America, since this has become less palatable for the regular person to eat this, you still will be able to find this at restaurants, of course. There's going to be restaurants that serve this. But if you live in a city, there's going to be butcher shops that definitely have these where you can actually get this. And now there's also a lot of newer companies coming up that mail things to you. So you can find some places that have this mailed to you. And I think the difficulty level for preparing this is rather low. Like you should be able to prepare this if you just have like an oven. Yeah. And you should be able to do this relatively easily. And this, I suggest if you haven't tried it, definitely try it. I think right now maybe marrow and things like this are things that are normally used, repurposed for things like dog food and pet foods and things like that. Because this is not something that the farmer is just going to throw away. Because this is very valuable. Protein is very valuable nutrition in this that will find ways. At least that's something in the United States of America, in this whole industrialized world, is so-called capitalist world. They're not going to let things go to waste. People say a lot of food is thrown. Yeah, maybe the food that's actually produced, it's thrown due to regulations. If you actually give that to somebody else and they get ill, they can sue you. So there's these things where you're not allowed to even just give the food at a restaurant and pass it on to like a homeless shelter. There's things around that, or just putting things that are past the sell-by date. You can't just be like, oh, somebody can come pick it up, because it's crazy how you see some of these things. You go to like Walmarts or things like that. I'm not suggesting you do this, but on a regular date during the week, Walmart just, at the dumpsters before it's come to picked up, there's just pallets and pallets of food because it's past the sell-by date, and that's a ridiculous thing that I hope gets fixed. But I think when you're still working with these farmer type of things, once they do the cuts and they send them out, there's ways that they still make use of the parts that are not actually seen. Because I remember when I got to the States, I was in New York City. I was just trying to find some cow kidneys, and I couldn't find them in the stores. Like occasionally you find livers, but because of the foods that are the antibiotics and the things that are pumped into them, the liver of the cow is going through so much that it's not really palatable to put it out. So it's some things you can't find unless you go to the actual butcher shop. But here in Kenya, you can find these things. It's just a typical thing that's still there. Normally you go and it's like right from I think arbitor is normally called, where they normally slaughter these things. And you can actually go to the actual main city arbiters, or when you go to the butcher shops or when you go to the supermarkets, it's straight from the arbitrage to there, and you get all kinds of different parts of the meat. So definitely high suggest, if you've never tried bone marrow, try it, and then come back and let us know what the mouthfeel was. That maybe you have a better explanation than we do. So, yeah.
Well, I was just going to make 2 points before we move on. I've seen bone marrow more frequently at butcher stores. There are some sort of like, at grocery stores, because where I'm from upstate, there are some stores that sell like local products as well, and I've seen bone marrow there as well. It's definitely on the cheaper side because not a lot of people buy it, but I mean, you're going to get like 2 per package. So if you wanted to make like a lot of it, you'd have to buy a ton. I'm sure you could probably buy it in bulk from somewhere. And I have to ask Edward, but he was telling me he buys things from a store where they actually sell things that are sold after the use by date. So like they're cheaper. Cool. And he was telling me like you can get like soda for like a fraction of the price just because it's like officially you have to sell it by the state. But I mean, it's soda. It's not going to go bad. So if you like buy stuff like that or flour or other things, I mean, you'll save a lot of money because flour. I don't know how long flour technically keeps, but the thing is, if you keep it like sealed up and airtight, it'll last. I mean, because as long as you keep it dry and keep everything out of it, it's fine. So things like that. I mean, if you buy things like that can hold up over time, you'll save a lot of money. I have to ask him the name of the store, but somewhere in Utah, I guess that store exists. So
yeah, I'll be interested to see what because different states have different laws and different regulations on the things. There's some places you're just not going to be allowed to do that. But one more thing on the bone marrow, another magnificent thing of bone marrow is bone marrow stew. Just get that, just boil it. Many people in the United States of America have pressure cookers. This is another thing. Like on the kind of access to tools that the average American has compared to the things they actually do with those tools, it's like super sad. Like someone will have like there's a sale on a pressure cooker, so I'll buy this pressure cooker for like $20, and they'll use it like once a year. Like there's so many things you can do with it. So yeah, just a bone marrow stew where you just put the bones and just stew it up and you just boil it. Like here, that's a typical thing that we do when we get meats. Sometimes you'll get the cut of the meat and you'll be using the cubes themselves for the stew, but then you cut it off. You cut it off yourself at home. Then you bring those bones and you just normally turn the Jiko on, which is just a charcoal stove, because if you're using the gas or if you're using electricity, you're normally going to boil this for a long time. So it's more it's more cost effective to use the charcoal because charcoal is a lot cheaper and will maintain that low heat. And you just boil it for a long time, just reduce the water. And it's just the taste, just literally just that. Sometimes you put some cilantro in, sometimes you put some onions, a little bit of salt, but normally not even anything else. Just the flavor of the bone marrow itself into the stew. It's a common thing, like you even see just on little kiosks and little kind of shanty like restaurants that are brought up on the side of the street. That's another typical thing that you'll see, just people just drinking little cups of just bone marrow soup. It's just it's a magnificent thing. It's really hearty. It's just something that can really just help on those mid meals kind of thing. Like you just have it instead of drinking maybe soda or something else with your meal, you just have that with your meal. It's really high suggestion me on that one.
Yeah, you can do a lot. I mean, I've seen this place Abraham and I used to hang out at closed, but they had a bone marrow burger. There was like a piece of it on there.
Oh, wow.
I've seen bone marrow and ravioli. You can do a lot of stuff with it because, like I say, that protein and fattiness, and like with the ravioli, I think it was oxtail, but then there was like a little bit of bone marrow for like texture and flavor in the ravioli itself. Things like that. I mean, there's a lot you could do with it for sure.
Yeah. Okay. So moving on to the next one.
Yep.
Okay, the next one is vol au vin. Was it vol au vent?
Vol au vent.
Vol au vent.
Yep.
Vol au vent, which is sweetbreads, escargot, puff pastry, garlic butter, and parsley.
Mm-hmm.
It's an interesting plating here.
So this is very interesting. It was funny because I posted this, and a guy I went to culinary school with, actually, we had a class together. He was a sommelier most recently. I posted this. He goes, "What is this, France in 1972?" This is an old school dish. So some of it attributed to there was a famous French chef. His name was Antoine Crème. He lived in the 19th century, and he was the one. He wrote a book. He influenced Escoffier, who in turn he wrote what a lot of people consider like the Bible of cooking, like. I'm trying to remember if one of them coined the term haute cuisine, but basically they were the ones who really they were the ones who really codified, like, okay, these are the sauces, these are like the standard things for the basis. What do they call it? Fond de cuisine, like the foundations of cuisine. They were the ones who sort of codified this. Some people say he came up with this dish, but it's kind of unclear. What it is here, it's puff pastry. There's usually, I think you can actually buy puff pastry already prepared like this, but usually what you did was you had a disc on the bottom, you have like a sheet of puff pastry, you stamp out with a ring mold, you stamp out a circle, you stamp out another circle in the middle, and you put a base underneath, and then the piece that you stamp out in the middle, you bake separately, and then you put that on top. Vol au vent in French actually means wind blown, and because the puff pastry, the way it gets aerated, the air blows into it. Typically, it's done with different things. This one I had because it's springtime. It's sweetbreads. For those who don't know, that's the thymus gland from the veal. It's like right here. It disappears as the animal grows, though, so you have to get it when the animal's young. Springtime is usually big on veal and lamb, so that's usually when they harvest them because that's when the animals are slaughtered. Escargot, those are snails. There's the burgundy snails, for those who don't know. They're this species of snail. They're very big. Typically, they come canned, although some people have them fresh as well. There's the garlic parsley butter. I think that's pretty self-explanatory, just parsley on top, and this is a parsley oil. Any thoughts or questions? Or
Yeah, with escargot, the mouthfeel of them, I think, is closer to like squid. It's not necessarily it's not
almost like a mussel, kind of like a mussel. That's what I compare it to.
I mean, and this is something where, yes, because of what it is, most people would kind of be more distasteful for it, but I guarantee if you actually ate it if you actually saw it on a plate without knowing what it is, you'd probably just pick it up and eat it if nobody told you what it was. And the taste is not that bad. I mean, of course, it's depending on how it's cooked and things like that. A lot of these things is kind of the things where it's like, if it's on land, people don't eat it, but if it's like in the ocean, they're like, okay, I'll eat the ocean version of that land creature that I'm not going to eat. Like that kind of happens with the same thing, kind of how like they say what lobsters are. Wait, is it lobsters or Is it
Yeah,
pigeons of the sea?
cockroach of the sea.
Yeah, so it's because they're bottom feeders and they just eat stuff at the bottom and things like that. And it's literally just an insect. It says the exoskeleton and things like that. But then people find it delicious. So some of these things, this is definitely, like you said, okay, with the puff pastry, if you can find it this way, but then making the puff pastry itself, that would raise the challenge level of making this at home. So I think this would be one of those dishes that I do suggest if you find it somewhere, if you're in a restaurant. This is something that's probably not going to be as easy to make at your home if you're not familiar with cooking. So give it a try if you actually do get the chance to actually try it. But you say so it's a puff pastry. It's kind of like the layer type of thing. So it's like the
Yeah, so the way you make puff pastry if you do it from scratch is it's very tedious because it's like you have a dough, you have butter, you fold the dough over onto the butter, roll it, put the butter, do that. But the thing is, if you mess it up at all, like if it gets too warm, if you don't have it sealed, all this, when you bake it, it's not gonna puff nicely. It's gonna be all over the place or be uneven. The thing is now you can buy you can buy it frozen. As long as you keep it frozen, it'll hold until you bake it. The other thing you can do is, I mean, I wouldn't expect someone to have this at home, but you can actually buy dough sheeters that feed the butter and the dough into, it's almost like a conveyor belt with these like rollers, and it presses it and then it comes out, then it rolls it back in, then comes out, rolls it back in. So it'll make puff pastry for you. But that's more like commercial kitchens. Like I wouldn't expect someone to have that in their home.
I mean, like that's the kind of thing that I think I would get. Like for me, with some of my interests, I can imagine if I finally settle down in a home and do stuff like that, there'll definitely be a dark room because I'll go back into taking just regular photographs and things like that. In that dark room, I'll probably also have a kiln and a wheel because I really like the clay stuff. But I think now that the other kind of purchases I make, I think would be a very food related thing. It's have all these machines and stuff to actually just make different kinds of things. But yeah, that's a similar process to like making the dough for croissants, right?
It's the same. It's the same dough. It's the same dough. Yeah.
Okay. So yeah. So high level on that. But as mentioned, with the different advances in the food industry, now you can actually buy the frozen thing and try it on yourself. So that drops down the difficulty level of actually doing it. And yeah. So I think that's it. I don't know. Anything else to say about this?
One thing I was going to add that's kind of interesting, your lobsters. I just thought if there was something, they were talking about people eating bugs recently with cicadas, this whole Great Reset thing. So apparently, if you're allergic to shellfish, you can be allergic to cicadas as well. And there were people who were eating cicadas that had shellfish allergies that were actually reacting the same way. I hadn't thought about this, but because I remember my mom tried when I gave my mom escargot. At first she was grossed out, but then she tried it. She's like, "Oh, this is good. This is like a mollusk." But I'm like, it's the same family. It's just like you say, one's underwater, the other's on land, but it's the same family. That's why the texture of the meat is so similar, and they both have shells.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. With the sweetbreads, aren't there other parts like the heart? Sweetbreads covers a certain range of different parts of the animal.
Well, no. Sweetbreads are the thymus gland in the veal. They're only in the younger animal. They emit that a certain hormone, but then as the animal grows, they actually disappear. So you can only get them in the young animals. You can't get them older.
Is there another term they use for like covering all the interior things, like the livers and the heart and the intestines?
Offal. OFFAL. Yeah.
That's not just the intestines.
Offal refers to all organ meat, so that's like whatever. Sweetbreads are that specific organ.
Okay, because you normally see this. This is something I normally see in books of like old timey times, so like the Game of Thrones type of things. Oh, you can eat the sweetbreads. So it's just the thymus, and what else?
It's just the thymus gland of the veal. That's all it is. Sweetbreads. Yeah, it's that.
Why do they just call it the thymus?
because sweetbread sounds nicer. Because I remember when I saw it in school, I was confused because I saw it on the menu and sweetbreads. I'm like, wait, is this a dessert for dinner? And I'm like, oh no, what is this? Like, oh, okay, now.
Yeah, no, that's something that people might confuse when it's mentioned there. They're not talking about, in this case, the puff pastry. The puff pastry itself, depending on how it's prepared, might have some sweetness to it, but I think it's more of the bread taste, right?
What you mean the sweetbreads themselves?
Yeah, I was saying the puff pastry itself.
Well, this sort of goes to what I was saying about your description earlier. Is that when you have a restaurant, you work in food service, you have to find ways to sell things, and the problem is if you say things like thymus gland, people just picture like some organ and they don't want to try it. So you have to find like a nicer sounding thing, and then if people ask, "Oh, what is this?" then you can explain and they can proceed accordingly. But what I found with stuff like this is people who aren't familiar but have tried other things like liver or heart or something, they'll be like, "Oh, okay, I'll give this a shot." And sweetbreads have a very delicate flavor, though. Liver is very high in iron, kidneys too. That's why they have the stronger flavor. But sweetbreads are very delicate. Like I'm not gonna say they're not like white meat exactly, but kind of in that direction. Sweetbreads kind of went through an interesting phase because I remember it was one of those things where they were popular in France and then here they kind of died out, but then people started popularizing them and then they got expensive again. So if you go to a lot of places springtime, they'll have some kind of sweetbreads on the menu usually.
Okay. I went to one of my favorite sites because I just really like getting into like etymology of words. This is etymology.com, and look at sweetbread. And the pancreas of an animal uses food. So I don't know what pancreas is. Like, it's from 1560s, from sweet. The bread element might be from the Old English bread or flesh. So it's kind of like the Eucharist. This is a Eucharist thing. Where it's like flesh, blood of my blood, flesh of my flesh. Where it's like getting the body of Christ.
Body, yeah.
Yeah, so that might be part of where it comes from that. But then I guess it's still, that doesn't really give me too much. But yeah, 1560s was when it originated, and it's carried on from that. But there actually also is there's actual bread, like dough type of stuff. That there's a whole section of those called sweetbread. So again, as Stephen said, do not confuse that. Do not go to a restaurant and order sweetbread thinking you'll get like some kind of like nice brioche bun or some nice potato bun or anything, and then actually have the sweetbreads. Make sure you're actually getting what you're ordering. Yeah. Okay, next one?
Sure.
Okay, so the next one is I always get this wrong. Foie gras?
Foie gras.
Foie gras terrine. A foie gras terrine, which is a strawberry rhubarb puree, and a tasty brioche, which is not pictured.
I apologize. This photo wasn't the best as far as lighting. Minetta Tavern, they dim the lights at a certain time, and I didn't want to turn on the flash because it's blinding. But then it's like it is a little dimmed. So foie gras, for those who don't know, that's the liver of a force-fed goose or duck. It's pretty controversial because there have been a lot of debates about how humane it is because you basically force the animal and the liver blows up, it gets a lot fatter. This foie gras itself, of course, is almost entirely fat because you figure the liver, there's some protein, but then when it blows up, all that's fat. So then when you eat that, it's mostly fat. So one of my favorite foods, not something I recommend you eat every day, though. Like I said, Ferdinand Point had foie gras and brioche sandwiches every day, died at 40 something. But once in a while it's nice, and you usually don't eat a huge piece of it because it's so rich. So this was a terrine. The way they make that is similar to like what I described above, where you usually we had one at Les Spalier where I forgot to mention that in my career history. That's actually where I did my externship for school in Boston. Unfortunately, it's closed now. We had a foie gras terrine, and the way you make that is you take the foie, you have to actually pull it apart, and there's a lot of veins running through the liver itself. So you have to pull off all like the fatty liver around the veins and separate it. And then what you do is you mix that, usually different spices, usually like Christmas type spices, cinnamon, allspice, cloves, nutmeg. There's some pink salt. Pink salt is a curing salt. So there's nitrates versus nitrates versus nitrites. Nitrates are what you use to cure like prosciutto or salami. Like you put it for like you cover them for like a year or something and cure them. Whereas this is something you put in like kind of before you serve it, maybe like a few days later or something. And so there's usually the salt, sugar, pink salt, spices. Some people put brandy in too, gives it a bit of flavor. And then you put that in the terrine, and then you cook it in the water bath as I described above with the, and then the idea is you melt the foie enough so it congeals, and then it solidifies, and then you just slice it. And there's a layer of fat that sort of separates at the top there. Well, it'll probably come up in another discussion. I don't have any pictures here, but there's foie gras torchon. Torchon is French for towel, and the way you make that, it's a similar thing, but it's like a log shape, and you actually make that using it's a similar process, but you actually poach that in stock, and then you pull it out, and then you cool it down, and you hang it, and then that sort of like hardens, and then you slice that. Thomas Keller actually has a story where he says when you poach the torchon, he's like, don't lose sight of it because he's forgotten about it and the whole thing just melts in whatever you're poaching. It's like, hey, what's this floating here? Because this texture is very similar to butter. Like this is much closer to butter than the bone marrow is. So again, if you roast this, it's just going to run everywhere. So it's like, maybe I'll talk about a hot foie gras preparation elsewhere, but with something like this, it's like you don't want any heat because the heat is what melts it down and then it congeals, then you eat it like that. So strawberry rhubarb puree, I think that's self-explanatory. Little garnish here, some microgreens. There's celery that's shaved very thin. You take a peeler, you get this nice slice of celery. It's this nice translucent strip. It looks nice on the plate. Doesn't taste like much, but it looks kind of cool. And then brioche on the side. Typically, brioche gets paired with foie gras. So thoughts, comments?
Yeah, well, this one, it's just, like some of these foods used to come by. There's interesting ways some of these foods come by. We might do this small little vignettes about this, the history of certain foods.
Yeah.
But some of the things throw me something very practical. Someone's like, oh, this is just how we used to store something. And then for some reason, it just turns into something that people find to be a delicacy. And it turns into that when it was just created for something very practical. Sometimes it's like this was something that was thrown away and then somebody was scrounging around for something to eat and this is all they could have. And then that turns into something. And then sometimes, yes, it's something that is very specific. There was something that it might have been in here, but we were talking about what we're going to be doing with this. He mentioned there was a particular meal that was started because the king was just like, I want this, and then the king's chef was like, okay, let me just go to the kitchen and make it, and then just invents a brand new meal.
Yeah, Kaiserschmarrn. So it's an Austrian dessert. Like I said, we can do that. I still have pictures from my old job, and the joke was that he said, "I want to see what kind of schmarrn the chef is serving today." And schmarrn in German doesn't have an exact translation. It's kind of like stuff, whatever. Like it doesn't have an exact word. So then the chef just came up with this on the fly, and the Kaiser loved it. So then that just became a dessert.
Yeah, and that's why I'm truly suggesting that if you want to do one kind of art, like physical, creative art, visual art with your hands, I suggest doing something with ceramics or sculpting, because there's a reason that I think there is that process of God saying, like most religions saying, okay, man was made from dirt and things like that, not just because the earth is here, but just that process, I think, of creating something in your hands and being able, like creating a plate. And every time you use that plate, just a small cup, or just like a small dish, you created that with yourself, like, I made that. There's something in there.
Yeah.
And then now I think there's something extra with actual food. That's what I'm saying. I'm suggesting, please just try to find some time and just learn some of the basics. And not even if you're just going to do that and cook a lot. I'm not saying you have to all of a sudden just be cooking every single day, but even just understanding the basics gives you more appreciation when you actually go out and you eat something with somebody. But this also lets you have that ability to go out and see somebody do something and have enough knowledge about what was there. Then you can go home and you can freeze down, you can try, and you can just make your own dishes. And just something simple, and then having friends come over, or just your spouse or your loved one, or your kids, being able to enjoy that with them. It's to me one of those really truly enriching moments of humanity. There is some art to it. There is some process. That thing of working together and just creating something in the dish and the taste and thing. It's something rather valuable that I think definitely try. And my suggestion, one of the few tools that you can get to just up your game out, is a food thermometer, which is something that I need to purchase because, as we were mentioning, as from the first one, we were talking about making the different like gelatin. We're talking about the pate. Actually, you have to do it to a certain temperature with a certain thing. We're talking about the gelatin in it holding together. This is a puree, so this is a bit different from making an actual preserves or things like that. I tried to make some strawberry preserves, and I was trying to just, off of my mind, see how it actually looked. But then you need to actually get the actual temperature to actually get it right, because if you overcook it, the gelatin it's not gelatin when you're talking about in the fruits. I'm forgetting the actual
Pectin.
Yeah, the pectin. Yes, the pectin doesn't. It will break up too much if you cook it for too long. So I overcooked it and it broke up, but then I can still use it. It's not good for jam, but you can still use it for like baked goods and things like that. But a food thermometer, just having that will up your game, and you'll be able to do certain things. I think you'll be very impressed or very surprised if you haven't really gotten one before, how much that would help just understanding certain temperatures of things. And once you actually know the temperatures by actually going it, after some time you'll be able to eye it and kind of get closer to it. But Stephen can let us know, from being in actual professional kitchens and top restaurants, they still use food thermometers.
Oh, of course.
You're
supposed to have one. At culinary school too, everybody has one. You have to, and if you don't have one, they make you buy a new one.
Yeah.
If you lose yours, because as you're getting at with these things, but also with things like meat, like they typically teach you like 120, 125. That's like rare, like 155 is well done, then in between accordingly. And then you have to factor in carryover cooking, which maybe we'll probably get into more as I talk about meats. Like the idea that even after you pull it out of the oven, it keeps going, and it's like you have to anticipate how much more will it keep going. I have a relative, I'm not going to mention who, but like I kept giving her a time because she kept cooking the hell out of pork, and apparently she would pork you can actually have like a pork loin at like 135, 140. It's still good, because people think you have to have pork well done, but the thing is, pork is much better raised now. Like I think the last case of trichinosis from pork here was like the 70s. So it's like, as long as the pork is, raised in a decent environment, it's fine. But pork well done is 155. She pulled it out at 165, and then it would keep carrying over. So by the time the pork was done, it was like 180. And I'm just like, that is horrendous. Like that's like, you're gonna have fibers stuck in your teeth for like a week after that. It's like I explained to her about carryover cooking. She's like, oh, I'm like, yeah, because I mean, like, first off, 165 for pork is way too far done. Then on top of that, if it keeps going past that, it's
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah, in most cases with meat, it's better to go low heat for longer than high heat
Yeah.
for shorter, from my estimation.
I don't know if it depends on the. Well, I was gonna say what's interesting. I don't know if we'll probably do some calamari dishes, but calamari is interesting because it's either high heat very quickly or it's low heat over a long period of time. And there's this weird thing with calamari where there's this like sweet spot in the middle where if you cook it too little, like it starts to get tough, then it becomes tender. But then if you keeps going, it gets tough again. And there's like this really exact like timing. Like Gordon Ramsay in one of his cookbooks that I have, he talks about like this calamari was fried 10 seconds too long. Like he has it down to an exact science. Yeah. So there's things like that. But if you're paying these high prices, I mean, you have to get that, exactly.
I think when you come into certain things like squid, octopus, these are almost different. I feel like they should be a different category where they shouldn't be together with meat. They shouldn't be together with like beef and cow and chickens. Like the kind of thing you're eating. Yes, it's an animal, so this qualifies.
Cephalopod.
It's such a different creature. Like it's such a different animal where the actual meats that you're eating are it's quite a different thing. Yeah.
Yeah. Cephalopod. Okay. That's the family.
Yeah, that's it. Are octopus and octopi also in cephalopods?
Yeah, octopus, squid, cuttlefish. I'm trying to think what else, but like that kind of general.
Okay. Okay. So next one.
Sure.
Okay. Now we're moving on to steak tartare, which is like quail egg and Dijon, Parmesan, capers, sourdough crostini, which is not pictured. With some of these, I might be able to source the actual images from other places. This is a rather relatively well-known place, so it might be places online. But if not, we'll be using the images. And Steven's been taking these pictures more for himself, but now that we're doing this, we'll be doing a better job at taking some of these pictures of some of these things.
Yeah, for sure. All right. So this tartare is good. It's pretty standard, though. Usually it's beef, typically the loin, they cut it up usually by hand. You just cut it into thin strips and cut it down so it's like little bite-sized I don't know if cubes, but like it's really small pieces. Usually you mix it in with, there's usually some kind of sauce. It's usually mustard based, more Dijon mustard on the outside, a quail egg that's cooked not all the way through, runny yolk that you sort of mix in. There's some micro mâche here. That's a type of lettuce. Some Parmesan shaved kind of thin, and then capers. For those who don't know, they're the pickled bud of a flower. They're kind of acidic. They're a little salty, kind of acidic from the vinegar brine. It pairs well with a lot of things. Again, sort of cut through the richness, fattiness of the beef. And you do sourdough bread. I mean, you don't have to, but typically you would do sort of a lighter bread with this because it's not like foie gras or something where I guess you're trying to sort of accentuate it, but it's like if you have like brioche, it'd be like eating a bunch of butter with this. It just kind of drowns it out, and it's like it doesn't really make sense. No?
Yeah.
Right. Thoughts or comments?
The lighter bread, that means like with the sourdough, due to the fermentation on it, it normally creates more air bubbles in the bread, and the bread itself is actually just literally lighter. Yeah. Like if you get a same size loaf of a brioche versus that, you have different. I think one of the ones people would know would be a very heavy one is what's that? Is it ciabatta? Is that the? There's a certain,
ciabatta, yeah.
Yeah, ciabatta. There's a certain that's an Italian one where it's they normally actually make them really thin, but it's such a heavy, dense loaf. So yeah, I think that's what he meant by the. And for people who've had good sourdough, you will know that's a lot airier of a bread.
That bread is interesting to make too. I made ciabatta in school because with something like brioche, it's almost considered a cake because it's so dense. There's a lot of eggs, a lot of butter, sometimes milk, depending on the recipe. But with ciabatta, you just work the hell out of the dough. Like you throw it in the mixing bowl. And I remember my baking teacher, he's like, when you mix it, it should eventually sound like there's a basketball in that bowl. Like it gets worked. So like it gets worked so much it becomes like pretty chewy. But that's the style of the bread. Whereas like I say, brioche is more cake-like, and then of course, a baguette is lighter, and it depends what you're looking for, what you're pairing it with, all that.
Yeah. Okay. Sure. And with this one, with the quail eggs, what other eggs have you had? I might have had. I like ostrich is really good. I know there's some places here that have ostrich. I don't think I've had ostrich. Of course, I've had chicken. I've had duck. I don't think I've had goose.
Yeah, I've had goose and duck egg. Yeah. Okay. Goose and duck egg are pretty close. I mean, if you were to compare them to chicken eggs, the fat content's a little higher. A a bit creamier because of that. I haven't had turkey eggs. I've seen people with them. I haven't tried them. I know they're leaner and they're bigger. So I guess if you want to do maybe, I'm sure they're probably healthier because I'm sure the fat content's lower and there's more protein. So,
Well, it
but I
depends on
haven't
kinds of
tried them.
fats. Yeah, it
Yeah,
depends on
I
kinds
haven't
of
tried them.
fats, and chances are turkeys on average will be raised in a more true to their natural environment status than your average chicken eggs that you're going to get. And please let me tell you, to my American friends out there, to my first world friends out there. Yes, you live in certain cultures where you can get access to all these foods at all these times, but I beseech you that rather reduce your intake of certain foods if it means you can save up a little more to purchase the more expensive versions that are raised in this whole thing. Everything is organic. Everything is chemicals. I get that, but that's the main point. That's the main point of this "you are what you consume" thing. The animals you eat are also what they consume, and then you become that. So if the animals you eat, that's part of the reason we mentioned with pork earlier. Like pork is better raised now. Part of the problems with pork, why it's been taboo in certain religions, is because pigs eat everything and
Yeah.
anything at all times and will able to digest it. I've seen goats eat some pretty crappy stuff, but there's still like limits to what they'll eat or they'll just die. But the pigs will just look completely healthy, eating all kinds of filth. And then if you eat that, you can get sick off of that. And their biology is also very close to humans. So there's some, I think there might be something in there with the transition period. So there is that. But then when you actually go into some places in Italy have certain protections of certain prosciutto or things like that, because it's like, okay, this has a regional protection because you can only get this kind of prosciutto from this area because these pigs feed on this certain bush that grows on these like 3 hills in this one area, nowhere else in the world. That's like the majority diet that they have. And that actually infuses itself into the actual meat. Like you actually taste that in the meat. So when you do that with certain foods, certain things are done in certain ways. And it's not just, oh, it's a first world country thing. Even here in Kenya, one of the big main issues is a lot of these people with these random stalls on the side, they don't even go and use sewage water to water these vegetables. And not even just the sewage water to water them, but sometimes when you're actually displaying it, you go to stores in the United States of America, and some of them they'll spray they'll mist the vegetables to get them look more fresh. Here sometimes they'll dip them in buckets of just sewage water and put them on display, and people just buy them. So it's been feeding them the sewage water, it's dipped in, and people get that. So that stuff gets into you. So if you can find places where you can look and you can say, okay, this chicken has been raised in a more conducive to, in a more close to its evolutionary environment, rather than just being stuck and cooped up in location, being fed all kinds of foods mixed with like corns or these kind of like hormones and things like that. And even just the chicken itself. This is a bleeding heart type of thing. I'm like thinking about the chickens. Just in general, when you are depressed, your body pumps things into your system. When an animal is also depressed, it'll get to pump certain things into its system. And that goes into its eggs, that goes into its meats, that goes into the other things. You just be better, just do better. And I think there's more of an awareness and there's more access to that, as we mentioned before. Now you can actually find farmers that will actually send you the stuff. I think I've seen some process where it's like they'll show you like this cow was born in like 2000 and it grew up this time. You can watch it. It's like they take you like selfies of the cow or whatnot, or they give you a thing. Like, this is what's this in its life, and then they're telling you, yes, some people actually order and say, we want like this cut from this cow, like 2 years ahead, because they know this cow is going to grow to its full age in its more natural sense, and then at that time have a rather relatively clean killing. Because even when it comes to the way that it's actually slaughtered, if you have certain versions of slaughtering where it's like a slow slaughtering, the animals know. And some animals are knowledgeable enough to know when something's happening. They can pick up the pheromones in the areas and the abattoirs and things. So there's certain ways of killing them that are quicker, where they hadn't dumped adrenaline into the meat right before it died. So there's all these things to be considered. So just saying, this is basically talking about eggs. When we're talking about eggs and other kind of things, please try to find the things. Because like with the tartare, part of why you can have this tartare, which is pretty much just raw meat, is because of the quality of meat that's actually being fed here, that's being actually served here, is you can have that. But if you just have this with just certain kinds of meat that you just pick up from the store, first of all, how it's packaged, the preservatives and the things that are in there, the animal itself, it could be deadly actually to actually have some of these things. And if it's not immediately so, some of these foods that you're eating by saying, oh yeah, I'm just going to save 50 cents here and there with my daily meals, you're slowly and slowly affecting your health on a longer term, where you could just say, okay, instead of having eggs every day of the week, I'm going to cut it down to eggs once a week and buy like more organic or more, let's say humanely raised. What's the term that they use for
free range is one thing, because the chickens can actually roam around in a field as opposed to like sitting in top of each other on in pens. Yeah.
Because here in Kenya they have like free range things where I tell you, like, I'll take some photographs. I think I already have some photographs on the Chef Minetta site where I did a back-to-back between the broilers, which is normally the ones that are normally cage raised, and the free-range ones. And it's literally a different beast. Like, it's lean and it's darker, it's tougher, it's even the smell from the food, like the taste, it's a different animal when you have it in that sense versus sitting. And we see that with human beings. Look at what's happening to human beings who have a lot of sedentary jobs and things like that. They're more depressed, they gain the weight, they're softer in body itself, not as healthy as the people who used to be out there just walking and just being lean and fit. So yeah, that's the something.
Softer in temperament too.
Yes. Okay.
So I was just going to make a few points before we move on. So it's interesting you bring up about pigs, because I remember talking to someone in culinary school about this, how people are like, oh, I won't eat pigs, they're dirty. Like, do you know how chickens are raised? Like, pigs are relatively clean. Like, chickens, like, they sometimes eat their own excrement. Like, they're in cages on top of each other, all this. Like, I think it's like 1 in 3 chickens has salmonella. That's why chicken has to be cooked well. Whereas like pork, like, you know, I wouldn't eat raw pork, but I mean, you can have pork medium. And like I say, last trichinosis case was 70s. So it's like, I mean, yeah, if you were to eat from pigs raised next to like a sewage plant or something, yeah, you'd get sick. But I mean, it's like, in general, it's not really a big thing. I think what you were sort of alluding to with your thing about the diet was the Iberico ham. That's one of my favorite things, actually. I think I might have some pictures from another place. I'd have to look it up, but it's expensive stuff, though. I think it's like $100 a pound. But it's the pata negra pig. It's a black pig. It eats a diet of usually acorns, sometimes chestnuts. That's all they eat. It has kind of like a nuttier flavor. Some people have wondered if it actually lowers your cholesterol, because there's a lot of monounsaturated fats. So it's like meat that lowers your cholesterol. For me, that's like too good to be true. But it's hard to get a hold of, though. I think it was illegal in the U.S. up until a few years ago, because like import laws and, you know, regulations and stuff. But they said it was kind of a pain, but I guess now you can get it. I mean, it's pricey. Like, it's not something you get all the time. I mean, one leg is several pounds, so you figure that's a few $100, but usually slice it super thin, so it's like it will last you a while. I'll say that. The way animals are raised, I was thinking of the wild boar versus the pigs, how the flavor changes with that too, because the wild boars are gamier and leaner because they're running around all the time. One of my favorite restaurants, DB Bistro, will probably cover that. I actually had I think it was a boar chop or something, and it was interesting, but it was paired with a Pinot Noir, and they said it was fitting because apparently the wild boar would actually snack on the Pinot Noir grapes, and the farmers would actually shoot the boars because they were, you know, preying on the grapes that they needed for wine. So like pairing the Pinot Noir with them, it's kind of poetic justice, but it also works well. Yeah, that was a really nice dish. Again, we'll do that in a future thing. And then the other two things I thought of, I had some friends actually way upstate. It's Cherry Valley. It's near Albany. Beautiful area. It's like really middle of nowhere. Like, it's very like picturesque. Like, there's like cows walking along the road, and there's like, you know, a nice view of the mountains, but it's like it takes like an hour to get to like a mall or something. I had some friends that used to grow up down the street from me, not in the city but upstate, and they moved up there and they started a raw milk farm, and it was really cool. They showed us their whole process. Like, there's a whole thing about like the cows are kept super clean. They go into this facility. They say the machine that harvest the milk has to be kept super cold. That way, right when the cows are milked, the milk is chilled like right away, so there's no chance to grow bacteria. Whereas in the past, it used to be that they would milk cows into a bucket and let the bucket sit, and that's how bacteria grew. But if you cool it down right away, it's fine. And of course, you preserve the probiotics and other healthy things. You know, it's harder to get raw milk. I mean, you can, but it's like there's some restrictions. You can't sell it on a large scale. So yeah, I know it's stupid. So that's the thing. Like, you can get certain cheeses upstate made with raw milk, but it's like only in small batches. I mean, the whole thing's stupid, but you know how we feel about government. So, and then the last point I was going to make was that it's interesting you bring up about adrenal glands. And I remember in a culinary school, we actually do a meat fabrication class, and the teacher showed us where the adrenal glands are. He said, those are the most bitter tasting things you'll ever eat, so you have to make sure to cut them out. And my friend Abraham, of course, being Jewish and doing the kosher diet, he said that's one of the prerequisites to a kosher slaughter is the animal has to be killed in one swoop, but the animal can't feel any pain or be scared. Like that's and like you have to pull that off, and then the one fell swoop thing is tough too because that can be hard to get right exactly. But it's like it's not kosher unless it meets that criteria. Plus, it gets blessed and other things.
Yeah, and that's another thing. Like it's different parts, and
Yeah.
I remember for me, I've been dressing chicken since I was I think in my early teens and things like that, where you just get a full chicken and you cut it up and
Mm-hmm.
everything. And the thing of the gallbladder, there's like green bladder in it that you can like cut, and if it goes into the meat, it kind of taints the meat and things like that. So there's things like that to just be aware. And I think agricultural tourism is something that is done. It's not something that's done enough. I think people should do it. If schools were truly about educating people, imagine if there was like a course where they said, okay, for every person in maybe their fifth grade or something, and again in ninth grade or something, just sporadically you just have a class where it's like, okay, we're going to do a field trip. Instead of doing like a field trip to like some amusement park or some museum, like a field trip to like some farm location and actually see how like food is made and things like that. That'd be kind of cool to actually have stuff like that. But if you are out now, you've been locked up in your homes for the pandemic for this time, and you're thinking of, hey, let's go on some vacation. Maybe you're not able to actually leave your country. Check within the country that you're in, and you could probably find certain farms and certain locations where you can go and actually see and witness how certain foods are made. And I think that would be very interesting to see. There's a lot of people who have not really experienced that, who have not really seen that. I was thinking of it, there's probably a lot of people who you can convince that onions grow on trees and picked like apples, because if they've actually seen how onion grows, like you can probably convince some people that. Some people have probably never eaten a grass-fed beef steak. Like just as I mentioned, just take some time, save some money up, order from some place that can ship it to you, just 100% grass-fed or just mostly grass-fed, none of this other corn and all these other things that cattle can't get access to in their evolutionary environment. And just go to like your regular supermarket and get a steak from there, same cut, cook them in the same way, and just taste them. And tell me there's not going to be a difference. Just use like salt and maybe some pepper, whatever. Just keep, and you'll definitely see a difference in the actual mass of the meat itself, the kind of muscle and the kind of animal that it is versus the ones. Just try that, and then you might still be able to just go back to that. But for me, that's one of my major gripes of having lived in Europe. I was born in Europe, then moved to Kenya, then moved to the United States of America. But at that time, I wasn't really as familiar. Then I went back to Europe, now I'm back in Kenya. And now when I go back and forth, there's just certain foods I just can't anymore in the United States of America, just from the way that it's packaged and processed and preserved, and the actual food that you actually get is just it's the simulacrum. It's like simulacrum. Like that word I'm going to say, but it's hard. Simulacrum of it. That's not. There's something missing. It's like I think the soul of the food is gone, but there's something missing, and it's something that we've discussed in a separate thing about how most Americans, many people have never actually tasted the strawberry, but they don't even taste the strawberry. They taste like not even the concentrate of the strawberry, but they taste like some chemical concoction version that doesn't even have any actual bit of the strawberry, not even like breaking down preserves or concentrate into the juice, but they'll drink like a Slurpee from like a 7-Eleven. And that will be what, when they think strawberry, that's the taste that comes to their mind. So if they actually have just the most natural strawberry ever that has never actually touched any actual artificial human created kind of processes to it, that strawberry will not taste like a strawberry to them. That kind of thing, to me, I've experienced that in a very real manner. And I think once you actually go out and try that, it's going to be an eye-opening experience, I think, if you actually go out and do that.
Definitely. All right.
Yeah, and I think that's going to be good because that's going to lead us into now the entree section where we'll be talking to some of these things that we mentioned before and some meats and things like that. So, all right, ready to go?
Sure.
Okay, so the first entree here is Lobster Thermidor, which is lobster, bechamel, and breadcrumbs.
Bechamel. So this is another old school French dish. What they do is they break up the lobster. They sort of they cook the lobster in bechamel. They put it back into the shell here, and then they put breadcrumbs over top, and then they cook it under the broiler so the breadcrumbs get nice and browned. And there's some chives on top. Pretty simple dish. It's nice. Not a huge portion actually. So like I think I ordered something else after this, but it's a nice dish. It's a nice dish though. It's an old school French dish. Lobster. There's different lobster dishes with cream sauce. Like there's I'm trying to remember Ferdinand Poix, the chef I mentioned earlier. Thomas Keller got a recipe from him. I'm trying to think what it was called, but there's lobsters with like a cream and paprika sauce. Sounded pretty good. They have some of those older school dishes. I mean, definitely richer stuff, but I mean, it's nice every once in a while. It's a nice alternative from just like boiled lobster with butter. You know?
Yeah.
Uh, uh,
And some of these lights going up. So some of these things also the things another thing that can step up your game on dishes is just trying to understand how to make some of these sauces. Like some of the things might seem like the béarnaise sauce, the bechamel sauce. Like I just made bechamel sauce for the lasagna that I did. That was the primary sauce I did. And it's just some flour, some butter. You put some nutmeg in it. What else did I
yeah,
put?
and so
Some
it's one
salt.
of
That's it.
it's called one of the mother sauces. The mother sauces are bechamel, hollandaise, velouté, espagnole, and tomate or tomato. And what bechamel is, the basis of it, it's you make the roux. It's the uh, fat and flour, typically butter, and then you don't get any color on it. You just sort of mix it together. Then you put in the milk, and then you simmer it. Usually with the French cooking, you put in some herbs in a sachet d'épices, which means like bag of spices. So you put cheesecloth. There's usually like bay leaf, thyme, peppercorn, something. You let that simmer in there, and then that thickens up over time. And usually you pull it out and you push it, depending, I don't know how you made it, but typically where I work, we push it through a chinois, the fine mesh sieve, so it's really smooth. And then you take the finished sauce, you either mix it in with other things. You can do mac and cheese. We used to do, I was telling you about, I think the other day, croque monsieurs. It's like a grilled cheese, but it has bechamel, gruyere, and ham. Then there's another layer on top of bechamel and gruyere, and you finish it under a broiler. You do bechamel in this dish. I mean, there's a lot you can do. Again, it's called one of the mother sauces because it's like the basis for other things.
Yeah. And
Yeah.
this is something that you can make in a more larger batch and
Yeah.
keep it like for later. So
Yeah.
you can make them at once and then you use it in different meals. And there's a lot of meals and a lot of things that it's something, as you said, with the mother sauce, it's something that you can add to your cooking tool belt, and from that you can freestyle off into a lot of different things based off of having that in your tool set. Okay.
And I'll probably get into it more as the discussion goes on, but it's the same with the other mother sauces, like with hollandaise. Like I will get into it later here, but there's béarnaise with like tarragon in it. There's choron, which is hollandaise but with tomato and basil. There's maltaise, which is actually hollandaise with blood orange in it. Like you can do a lot of different stuff, but you take like that basic foundation, you just keep adding things to it. So
all right, and we'll get into this again. Like if you're buying like another thing, just don't. There's no real reason to buy salad dressings. You can make so many easy ones with just basic things at home that are a lot fresher and a lot to your taste of things. Okay, now here we go. What is Thermidor? What's that? What does that mean?
That's actually a good question. I don't know what the word itself means. I should probably look that up. Again, this is kind of an old school French dish. Like you don't really see it that much. I mean, I don't think I've seen it on any other menus besides this one, at least not lately. Yeah, there's a Thermidor.
Go ahead.
Thermidor sauce. Yeah, it comes from the French word thermal, from the Greek word thermos, meaning heat. Let me see here. Thermidor. Oh, that was the name of an event. Let me see here though. So let's see, Lobster Thermidor. All right, so let's see, lobster. Oh yeah, typically the sauce too. There's also egg yolks and brandy in here.
Okay.
Yeah, they use bechamel though. I know it's a little bit different. Let's see here, history, Thermidor. Oh, there was a play called Thermidor, and it was sort of inspired by that after a summer month in the French Republican calendar. Which which overthrew Robespierre. So, okay, it's kind of based off that. It's sort of like, it's possibly created by a guy who was an assistant to Escoffier, who I mentioned earlier. This kind of makes sense. Like, I know the story about Eggs Benedict. They said there was a story about, I guess there was this couple, their last name was Benedict, and they used to go to a place for brunch, and I guess they complained there was nothing new on the menu, so they came up with that on the fly to sort of please them, and then they named it after them. So their story, it's like one of those kind of stories.
Okay. So it could be something in there. If we find any more information, we might bring that up again. But yeah, that's what we have for now. Okay, so moving on to the next one.
Sure.
Okay, here we have the Black Label Burger. Now we have dry aged cuts of beef, which is a skirt, steak, short ribs, brisket, and chuck. So that's all that's in there. Cool.
Yep.
And then the onions, with onions caramelized with black label Jim Beam, and then pommes frites to
Hmm.
accompany.
Sure. All right. So dry aged beef, for those who don't know what it is you let the beef, you actually let the beef sit out in a certain, it's a very cool, dry room. And as the beef ages, there's dry aging and wet aging. This is just dry aging, which I'll just talk about for the purpose of this. But you let it sit out and the beef actually dries out and it looks not quite moldy, but it gets kind of this weird crust on it. But you cut that off before you prepare it. But the thing is, as the beef ages, the flavors concentrate. Like when we did the class on meat, we had dry aged beef versus beef that wasn't dry aged. You could definitely taste more flavor with the dry aged, but of course it's pricier because when the beef dries out, it does shrink a bit, so it loses yield. Plus, fewer people are doing it, so there's less of it available. So if you get dry aged beef, you're going to pay a little more. I think this burger is like $30, so it's not a cheap burger, but it's good. The different cuts of meat, which a lot of people like to do that because there's different fat content, different marble content, so a different texture, different levels of richness. They kind of work together. It may not be the best comparison, but it's kind of like if you make apple pie or something, they tell you to use different apples because it's like some are sweeter, some are tartar, and the flavors kind of play off each other. Whereas if it's just one type of apple, it's very one dimensional.
Yeah.
Versus this is like a lot of different stuff going on. Um, Chuck, of course, is leaner. Short rib is fattier. Skirt steak is kind of in between. Brisket's kind of fattier. So it just sort of plays on that. The pommes frites, just French fries they make in house. They're pretty nice. I usually have them with mayo. Some people hate mayo, but I'm not crazy about ketchup unless it's like a special type of ketchup. So this is nice. And then the caramelized onions, the caramelized with the Jim Beam, like they say, the black label, a little nicer. You get the flavor in them. You can do a lot with caramelized onions. Like I've seen people do them with red
Yeah.
wine. This is with the whiskey. It kind of goes well with the beef and everything. Burger's a little pricey, like I say, not something I get all the time, but once in a while it's nice. Yeah, it's like 30, $35 something. It's a decent size, but it's more you're paying for those dry aged cuts and everything. That's why. So.
So what's the difficulty level on dry aging meats?
Um, I don't think it's so much that hard. I think you need the right facility because you need like cool, dry air, and you have to like let it sit in an area where it's not going to grow bacteria, but it can dry out but without attracting moisture. Then you have to cut off the outside. I think I mean, I'm sure you could probably look up online how to do it. I think it's more the space. Like you need usually these places like there's a steakhouse over here where they have a window and there's just like all these sides of beef just like sitting on racks,
Mhm.
just cool, dry area. And of course, you have to be completely clean when you go in and then take it off, cut it up, and then you usually break the steak down further and cook it. But it takes, it can take like a month. I don't know what the longest it goes, but it usually that flavor does get concentrated as time goes on.
And this is the thing with the technology and the things that most of the people listening to this have access to. Like you can get small little communities or something. You get a few friends together. You might have enough space, but you don't really feel like you need that much dry aged beef. But then just talk to a couple of friends together, contact some farmer, have a piece sent to you, and then you dry age it, and then you just share it among your friends whenever it's done. Somebody else might be like, "Hey, I have some place. Maybe I can make a still, and we can make some brew, and we share it." There's ways I think to with the internet. The internet is a tool. These social networks and things like this, social networks are made to socialize. I really dislike it when people are like, oh, this has made people, this is breaking communities, this is breaking society, this is making us far apart. People are sitting on phones. And it depends on what you're doing on the phone.
Yeah,
Right?
yeah,
It's not like,
exactly.
oh,
Yeah.
take the phones away and return people to letters. Like all of a sudden people will be more together. It's like, no, it depends on what you're doing with these tools. You can find ways to use these tools to actually get access and even create different kind of communities and make more connections. Just like right now, as you mentioned, maybe there's some self-bias in me traveling around and having experienced this, just having this relationship with Stephen over this point. If we were like, oh, social networks, all these things, the internet made people know. If we didn't have this, we'd be writing letters back and forth and things like that. We would be able to get this done. So that's just something that I think keep in mind, if you're not able to do this, you could probably go online and this small little online communities and things like that, or people who can help you through this process, or might be able to, you might contact somebody who does it on themselves. This is not somebody in a big supermarket place, but somebody might just have a small farmer, might have a small website and things like that. And they might be able to, you might be able to get yourself some dry aged beef from that person. So that's something to look into, something to keep in mind. And that's the kind of stuff that I think on this project that we're working on, that we'll be including some links and try to get in touch with some of these people. Maybe we can get some of those people on and have talks to them about doing this. Like, for example, I have one person in mind. I don't know if you're friends with him on Facebook or things like that, but he does a whole lot of things like sous vide. which
Oh yeah.
it's very, to me, that's it's a very intriguing way of cooking. Never actually done it, but it's something that's gaining in popularity. It's still rather niche, but it's these are the kind of things where I'm like, okay, the other day I was watching a video on wood turning, and I was like, oh, that stuff must be expensive. But I think your average middle class American could probably afford the stuff. I was thinking it was a couple of thousands. Then I go and check online. It's like $200 for a basic wood turning machine. I'm like, what? It's so cheap, like relatively cheap to actually get into wood turning. But then, as I mentioned, some people will get that and use it like once a year. With the sous vide machines are rather cheap from the actual things that I've seen actually being
They
done.
are now.
Okay,
When they came out, they were like 1,000 or more, but they say now you can get one for like low hundreds. I think
yeah,
like
I've seen that
you could
stuff.
probably even buy them used for like less. I mean, I don't know quality, but I mean, I think even a new one is like low. I think I've seen them for like 200 even. I mean, that's not,
Yeah,
if you take care of it, it'll last fine. So
yeah. And the sous vide, for those who don't know, is like when you cook stuff in this kind of it's air sealed package in water, right? It's like
Yeah, so in French it means under vacuum, and basically it's lower temperature. So the idea is that you would cook, like, for example, you can cook short ribs that way, and you can cook them for like 2 or 3 days straight like that, and you can actually have short ribs that are medium rare but super tender. So it's like a very low temperature and longer period of time. Um, Places I work, they did that like with duck breasts. Like you cook them like part way through, and then you just finish searing them in the pan. Maybe finish them in the oven a little bit. You can do it with steak. There's certain things you can't do sous vide, like you can't do green vegetables sous vide because they have to be high temperature quickly. I've seen people do calamari, like I was saying before, low and slow. There's a lot you can do. Thomas Keller actually has a book called Under Pressure. It's just about sous vide cooking,
cool.
and he's got some really interesting stuff. I haven't made anything. I don't own a circulator, but I want to at some point. And yeah, he has some interesting stuff. Like he has like a monkfish liver torchon, and he has different vegetable preparations and pretty interesting stuff. I mean, just how much he delved into it.
All right, cool. So yeah, that's something to look forward to. I think we'll start getting to some more of those things. And yeah, for me, I'm also a mayonnaise on fries guy. It started. I think it started rather relatively late, I think in my 20s. But before that, I was more of a ketchup guy, and I stopped using anything on it. And I used to make fun of the people who used to do the mayo, and then I tried it someday. I was like, oh god, that's that's where it's at. The mayo on the fries. Yeah, that's where it's at. Okay. Anything else you want to say about that?
Maybe we'll get to it later, but as far as ketchup, I like a ketchup called Kuntz ketchup. It's named after the chef Grey Kuntz. It's sort of a cross between original ketchup and modern ketchup. So it has like tamarind, fish sauce, some of those Southeast Asian items, but it also has tomatoes. That ketchup is awesome. Like that's ketchup you have to like keep away from the staff because they'll snack on it because it's so good. Like something like that is great. I wish I had the recipe. We had that at my old job. It was really good though. Oh.
That's another one of those things that some people, when they hear ketchup, they just think tomato ketchup, but there's a reason it's called tomato ketchup. Ketchup is actually just a type of dish. It's like sauce. It's like jam. It's not like strawberry. Strawberry defines the kind of jam that it is, but ketchup is the name of a process of preparing a certain food. So there's many other things. There's ketchups that have no tomatoes in them. So that's something, again, that I'm saying, like these things, sauces. Sauces are the key things, and if you can learn how to make different kinds of sauces on the sides, you can really upgrade your cooking. So there's a lot of ketchups that you could probably make, and really just once you learn what the different foods and ingredients do in the meal, as I mentioned, lasagna, where it's like a sauce, some kind of roughage, some kind of meaty thing, and then some kind of layering thing. Once you have that in your mind, you can now switch up and try different mixtures with those things to just that you understand the purpose of this in the meal. So with the ketchup, once you understand what gets into ketchup, there's different kind of things you can swap the tomatoes out for, and there's those kind of things. But yeah.
Sure. All right.
Okay. So the next.
That's all. That's all I had. Yeah.
Okay. The next one is a steak duo, which is a filet on the left and a ribeye on the right in the image, and a red wine sauce, cherry tomatoes, and asparagus.
Sure. So this was a special they had one day, which I saw and I definitely wanted to try. It's a very spring dish. You could probably tell by the ingredients. So the filet, it's the filet mignon. For those who don't know, I mean, I'd imagine a lot of people know it's the tenderloin. It's the part that sort of runs along the spine. The way cows move, it doesn't move a lot, so that's why it's so tender. It's funny because certain culinary people I've known complain that filet mignon is overrated because it's definitely a milder flavor. It is way more tender. That's why it's so valued. Chateaubriand is like the fat end part of it. That's like considered like the really good stuff. Some people take the earlier part, they cut them into medallions. Those are nice too, very tender. Filet is impressive because it's like you can cook the hell out of it and it's still very tender. You know, you can't say that about other cuts, obviously. The ribeye I like a lot. That's probably one of my favorite cuts. So that comes from like the upper rib cage part of the cow. It's another area that doesn't see much movement the way the cow moves, so it's very tender, very well marbled. Um, these steaks were very nicely cooked. I had the medium rare, very nice sear. If you look closely, I don't know how well you can see it, but on the ribeye, there's like a layer of fat on the top, but that was browned like perfectly. So it was like they rendered out a lot of the fat and it was crispy. The steak is more marbled. It's very tender, probably not as tender as the filet, but close. A little richer though because of the marbling. Red wine sauce was like a red wine reduction. That's pretty common with beef. The tomatoes, I want to say like it was like a tomato confit, like kind of like cooked in olive oil, and then just some asparagus. And the green here is chervil. Chervil, for those who don't know, that's kind of like a cross between parsley and tarragon. Like it looks a little more like parsley, but it's delicate and has like a licoricey flavor. A little sea salt to finish. Really nice dish. It was a special, and I thought it looked really good, so I ordered it. Yeah.
Yeah, for me, I'm not too big on asparagus myself. Asparagus and artichokes. Those are two things that I tend to avoid. And this is also this other food, so other vegetable called miranda here in Kenya. It's like I think it's like spiderwort or something. There's some I don't know the actual English or Latin name for it that would be known by people, but it's a very like slimy type of texture to have with it. Like when I say slimy, it's like I don't mean it like I was mentioned before. It's literally like I'll try to get some images of it where like we get it's like stringy and things with a.
It's is it? It's
Disgusting.
not okra. Okra is it? Because okra is kind of.
No, okra is normally there's a way of cooking miranda. We use the okra, which is like those lady fingers, some people call them that, where it's mixed with the miranda. There's a way that they have it there. You can just have the miranda itself. It's no because it's just it's actual just leaves or plant. It's not okra, but yeah.
Oh, because okra is slimy. Okra is slimy like that. That's why when you said slimy, I thought
they're cooked together sometimes for like double sliminess, and that's even further away from me. I'm like, no, get that away from me. But yeah, so that's one of the things in there. But artichokes and asparagus. To me, those are some things. And another one, I literally get headaches. Maybe this has changed because I haven't been around it for some while. When I smell truffles, I literally gives me migraine. It can give me migraines from having it. I don't mind the taste of it, but it's literal migraines from actually smelling that. But yeah, so in Italy, as you know, that there's a lot of regions that have artichokes a lot and asparagus is a lot in their cuisines there. And it's cooked well, but I'm just no, for some reason I just don't know. So
well, I was gonna say this asparagus is actually grilled, which I like because like blanched asparagus is kind of like and I mean you can put hollandaise on it, but it's like it's not the healthiest thing if you're looking for that angle. But this I like because like the chard, I feel like it sort of counteracts the strength of the asparagus, so like it gives it like a different flavor, and I don't know, I find it more agreeable. I mean. I'm not a huge asparagus fan. Like I got this dish more because I like the other stuff, but I mean, I don't mind it. I eat it, here and there. So.
And why? What do you think was the thinking behind the pairing the two steaks together?
I think it might have been sometimes what certain people they'll do dishes like beef two ways or like pork two ways or something like that, and the idea is maybe they'll get good prices on certain cuts of beef, so they're like, why don't we serve it together? So do like a smaller portion of each, like side by side. That way you feel like you're getting better value, but it's like because they got a good price, they can sell them for not too much. And this was a special, so like maybe they happen to get good prices, or maybe they bought enough that they got a discount. I mean, who knows? There's usually different things like that.
Okay. Yeah, I think that's one thing we will be including in the start of these. I'm taking down some notes as we work on this, and I shall be thinking about these as we go as well. Of thinking of some restaurants have just menus that fluctuate constantly. Some have at least a part that's fixed. Some is just fixed every time. Every time you go, it's the same thing. So this one, how frequent do they have these specials? Are they here for like a few weeks, or do they announce them ahead of time? Is it like 20% of the menu? Is it like you might go there for a event like it's an anniversary, and then you think, oh, next time in New York City, I'm going to go back and find this, but it's like never been served again. What's your estimation of what happens in a place like Minetta?
So there's certain dishes that I think they keep all year. Like I remember, like even when I went years ago, like bone marrow is still there, the burger's been there, the steak frites, which is coming up soon, that's there. At the top, they have a list of specials. There can be like 3 or 4 of them, but I think what it is the specials. They sort of do it based on what's available. And like I mentioned earlier with the pate, like if they make a lot of the pate, they'll probably run that special for maybe like a few days or a week or something. But if it's something like frog legs, like those I'd imagine don't keep super long unless you freeze them. So it's like they'll serve those for like a day or two and then like do another special. So It's kind of mixed, like a lot, and then a lot of the other stuff changes seasonally too. Like, so their chicken dish right now, I think it has, or it had morel mushrooms on it. I think they had one with ramps, but that got taken off because ramps just went out of season. This one coming up here, the duck, I want to say this was a summer dish. So there's things like that, like what's in season. Then like, it's big in old school French cooking too. They're very big on only using seasonal ingredients. So like strawberries will only be in season springtime. Like they won't serve like a winter dish. Like they won't buy them from Chile or somewhere and make like a dish with fresh strawberries. If they use them, they're either preserved or candied or something. That's why, like you notice, for example, ramps. For those who don't know, that's leek family. They're actually, the name translates in German as actually bear leek. Some people say they're shaped like bear ears. I don't really see the resemblance, but like what a lot of chefs will do is they'll buy a ton of them. They'll use the greens, like they'll do sautéed greens, they'll do like a puree, things like that, and then they take the stems and they pickle them and just use them the rest of the year. So like barbeloued, they did them with charcuterie for like the rest of, maybe not the rest of the year, but like a few months after. That way you can keep getting ramps even though they're out of season. Yeah.
All right, cool,
Yeah.
cool. Was there with tomatoes?
Yeah.
As we know, like on the actual animal, it's actually a fruit. I mean, on the plant, on the life form that it is, it actually
Sure.
falls more into a fruit, but it's normally considered and eaten along with other vegetables in salads and things like that. Was there a time historically where it was treated more like a fruit, and then it kind of transitioned over? If you have any idea.
Not that I'm aware of, no.
Oh. I was just thinking about that, but yeah, if I might look into that, some of these things, and take that down. Maybe I'll find it, and maybe that can be some kind of side things that we were talking about with this project. This little interesting asides about different things that come up. So, anything else you want to say about this?
That's all. That's all I have in that dish.
Okay. I think no. One thing we didn't really get. For me, I'm not too big on saying, "Oh, what's your favorite this? What's your favorite that?" Some people might appreciate that. There might be something. I don't know. Let us know in the comments. Do you prefer? Do you want us to tell you what our favorite things are? I don't have too many favorites and things. I just like different things for different things. Do you want Stephen to be like, "Oh yeah, this is my favorite at this restaurant," or suggestions? What is your opinion on that, Stephen? And what's your, to the people out there listening? I personally, I'm okay with not saying those. When I want stuff, I don't really take that. I'm more just interested in you tell me about your taste with it. Somebody telling me this is my favorite, this is my least favorite, that doesn't really sway me that much. But maybe y'all listening, it might be something you consider valuable, and if you consider it valuable enough, we might consider including it in what we're doing, as we're doing this in part for y'all. If Stephen and I are talking, I don't ask him what the favorite is, but this is not just between me and Stephen. Hopefully it's a conversation with you guys out there. So let us know what you think. What do you think, Stephen?
Well, I was going to say, I mean, I know they don't mean anything by it, but I get annoyed when people are like, "What's your favorite food?" or whatever, because I'm like, for me, it's such a loaded question. I'm like, well, like which continent, which place? I was talking to one of my new friends, and she's like, "I love Asian food." I'm like, could you be specific? I mean, I mean, even if you talk about China, you can talk about like, are we talking Szechuan? My chef in school was actually from Sichuan. They have the Middle Eastern influence, so there's like sesame oil and spicy stuff. Of course, there's Canton in the south. That's where you see like the glass noodles and stuff. The North Beijing area, there's more wheat. There's a Mongolian influence. Like it's like all these are very loaded questions. Like I'm not trying to be annoying. It's just like it's like asking, it'd be like asking you like, who's your favorite artist. It's like, well, what style of art? Is there a certain era? Is it like it just raises more questions than it answers,
Yeah. Yeah, and I guess there was a time when maybe that made some sense to people, but maybe you had fewer options of things to have. But for me, in my experience, it's been very tough for me to, and it's not just in foods. I just don't really have favorites in many things. Yeah, all right. So next one?
Yep.
Okay. So moving on to the Long Island duck breast, which is plum and carrot puree, some lavender, honey, baby carrots, and plums.
All right. So they have duck on the menu currently, but this was one I had a few years ago. I think this was actually a spring dish now that I think about it, not a summer dish. Pea shoots on top, that's a spring item. The carrots and plums like mixed together, pureed. It's more carrot forward, but you got the sweetness of the plums in the puree itself. Baby carrots, that's very big on old school French dishes. They're kind of annoying because you have to peel all these little carrots, and then there's usually dirt. Well, there's usually dirt around the stem, so you have to like take a paring knife and sort of like pry it out. It's an old school French thing, though. A lot of people still do it. Barbaloo did these as well. There's some plums. I want to say there's I think there's some pearl onion there too. I might not have I didn't write that in the notes. And then the lavender is sort of sprinkled on top. There's some salt and lavender on top of the duck. Skin is rendered very nicely. There's a little layer of fat. The perfect scenario with duck is you render out all that white fat, so there's just a thin brown layer. I got it. I got this duck like medium rare. Typically, duck is better like medium rare, medium, because the thing with duck is when you cook it well, it gets this very metallic flavor. But then if you undercook it, it's this weird thing where it's tough too. So you got to get that like in between point. Something like squab, which is like kind of, it's also called wood pigeon. They say apparently you have to cook it like medium rare on the dot, because if you cook it, if it's under, it's like really stringy and tough. But then if you overcook it, it gets tough again. So you got to hit it like perfectly. Duck is a little more forgiving, but the idea is similar.
Yeah, I think for most people, maybe duck they would get, or if you find a Chinese place, you get some duck there, and they normally have that. They call it Peking duck, or when they really fry it and dry it, like it's like almost orange when they get it. So I don't think you really get the full-on duck flavor when you get it from. Of course, there's going to be some Chinese restaurants where they're cooking it to the higher level, but it's a rather odd meat. Like for us, I remember had some ducks at one of the places living at. We slaughter it there, and actually from there, like slaughter the duck, dress the duck, pluck the leaves, dip it in the hot water, pluck the leaves, pluck the feathers and everything, and dress the duck. And it was literally like this duck was in my backyard eating things from the backyard, and we slaughtered it and they cooked it that night. So it's like almost like the warmth of the animal never actually left from its actual slaughtering to the point that we actually ate it. And it has the flavor is strange. It's I don't want to say like it has like the smell that comes. It's like kind of acidic. It's definitely not chicken. Does not taste like chicken.
No. Well, I would say, I mean, the fat content's definitely higher and it's more iron rich. So like it's, duck, I mean, chicken, it's pink and then you cook it, it's just white and there's a lot less fat. That's why it's, it's leaner except for the skin. Like that's that whole thing about like when skinless chicken was big because that's where most of the calories actually are. I mean, I eat chicken with the skin on, but I guess people were really like health nuts. With duck, the whole thing is fatty, but there's also a very thick layer of fat. So when you cook chicken, you can just put you can just sort of put it down in the pan and the skin is so thin it cooks quickly. But with duck, you actually have to render the fat out. There's a thick layer. So typically what you do is you do something called scoring. What you do is you have to cut this almost like grid-like pattern to make sort of illustrate kind of something like this. You have to like, you cut like kind of these lines that are like through. And the idea is that it allows the heat to hit it, but it penetrates, so it renders out more of the fat. And the ideal scenario with duck is you want this very thin brown layer and all the white to be gone. But it's hard to get exactly right because if you leave it in the pan too long, you can overcook the meat too, which you don't want. But you do want to render out as much as the fat as you can. And if you cook a whole duck, you typically score the animal itself, like the whole thing. And then you roast it, and you typically, the fat just sort of melts out, and you usually pull it out, and then you just keep cooking it. And ideally, you hit that point where the meat is cooked, but enough of the fat is melted out at the same time. Because I remember my mother saying to me growing up, she's like, I don't like duck, it's too fatty. I'm like, you probably haven't had it made right. If you don't render out the fat, yeah, you bite into this thick wall of fat. But if you cook it properly, it's a nice, like, crispy skin with the fat melted out.
Yeah. And in this one, the lavender, is it the lavender blossoms that are dried and then ground up?
Sort of crumpled over top along with some salt for flavor.
Okay.
Yeah.
And with, they said these are on top. Said what's the greenery? What's the shrub? The pea shoots. So pea shoots are edible.
Yep.
Yeah. So in some of these things, I kind of wonder how do they find which are edible, which are not? And in some cases with the plating, how do you tell? There's some cases where some stuff is plated that's not supposed to be eaten. It's not. I mean, it's not like they wouldn't put anything on your table that's inedible. Definitely, they wouldn't put anything that's poisonous. You get sued for that. But in some cases, they plate certain things that are not necessarily. They're more for the visual rather than actual consumption, right?
I don't know, because I used to think that, but I found in more recent times, chefs have been very big on, especially when I went to culinary school, they were very big on only put things on the plate that can be eaten. So some of the higher end places will sort of play on that. So like I remember the Fat Duck, that was a 3 Michelin star place in England. It was top restaurant in the world for a time. They actually have candies, but the wrappers are clear, but the wrappers you can actually eat too. So they do things like that, like creative things like that, where it's like, you're like, oh, a wrapper, what am I going to do? But no, you can eat the wrapper too. So like they're doing more creative things like that because you know, it's like I think they don't want to go through that where people are like, oh, can I eat this? Like some people will push it aside because they think, ah, it's just decoration. I don't really like it. But I mean, all these greens are edible. Like they're at seasonal. My second job here, we were very big on all these micro flowers. Like if you go to Union Square Market, you can buy them. You can eat all those flowers. I mean, you know, they don't taste like a lot, but and they look, it's more visual. But I mean, you can eat them. It's, you know, it's fine.
Yeah, they're definitely not poisonous and things like that.
Yeah.
And as we grow herbs here, like on herbs have some more like I won't say heirloom, but the older strains of like
Yeah.
cilantro and things like that. And that one has the flowers and stuff, and we just chop the whole thing. And with herbs and things like that, sometimes people normally eat just the leaves. Like even when they buy from the store, they'll pluck the leaves off the stalk and then eat that. But if you're, especially if you're making a stew, if you're making something like that, I suggest you actually chop up the stalk as well, because there's a lot of flavor in the stalk. And if you're using a stew, so you're cooking for longer, it can soften up and things like that. For me, I just normally chop up the entire thing. And even if it's a salad, if I'm having it raw or not, I just like getting the full flavor from the thing. So there's many different, there's a wide range of things. Cilantro is a basic one, parsley is a basic one, but there's a lot of other things in that family that you could probably get some access to. And this is also, I've mentioned something, if you're cooking, get a food thermometer. That's one of the things that will help you. If you're actually preparing stuff, learn how to make some sauces that can really like upgrade the actual level of things. Now, if you want to get into the whole production thing, I think even if you just have an apartment, you could probably get a small little, probably get the small pot, get some soil, and you can just grow some herbs. You can find some space if you have some space. If you have a kitchen, if you have a bedroom, you can find some space to just grow some herbs and things like that. And it's just something to just do, something something productive. Some people have flowers and things like that, greenery in their place just for show. You can have that and also eat from the things. And it's just, there's some value added stuff from having that I think we're losing in our life that could just add this little extra to your life, and you get used to it and get more familiar with it and just expand off of that. Yeah, there's some suggestions. And with these things, you might not be able to find stores that have the stuff, but a lot of these places, anywhere in the United States of America, you probably listen to this, you could probably order seeds for all kinds of different herbs and things like that that you can grow in very limited space no matter where you are, let alone if you have access to a yard. Of course, just don't have just grass out there. Just dig out a small little section and make yourself a little herb garden. I think it would be something to add some value to your life.
Yeah, I come from a family of gardeners. So when I was staying with my family during the pandemic, I planted a bunch of things in pots. Like I had chives, I had I had a few different basil varieties. I'm trying to think. There was like sweet basil. There was like this bigger basil variety. I'm trying to remember. Tarragon. I did a bunch of stuff, and you know, I just fooled around with some of those cooking. You know, it's nice to do. And there's so many herbs now. I mean, I was amazed like how many varieties of basil there are. There's like
Yeah.
opal basil, purple basil, Thai basil. Like there's so much stuff you can do. Oh,
All right. So moving
all
on
right.
to the last one of the
Sure.
entrees.
Yep.
Here we have the steak frites and with béarnaise sauce and maître d'hôtel butter.
Yep. Okay.
Maître?
Met. It's a met.
Maître.
Yeah.
Maître
So
d'hôtel.
it's this here. This is a skirt steak cooked on the grill. You can probably tell by the marks. So the maitre d butter, I'm just gonna call it that. It's it's the skirt steak. So that's from the blade, which is like, think of like sort of, if you were to like match a cow's anatomy with a human, think sort of like above the, like kind of like lower chest, like upper rib cage area. It's part of that. It's a part of that that's sliced off. That's why it's kind of thinner. The maitre d butter. So it's let's see, parsley, salt, pepper, lemon juice. So it's just kind of, so some of those things, it's supposed to sort of add flavor to the butter and sort of go against the fattiness of the steak. In that container there's the béarnaise sauce. So that's a hollandaise derivative for those who don't know. So hollandaise, it's typically you separate the egg yolks from the whites. You make a gastrique where you reduce, it's usually vinegar, water, peppercorns, shallots. In this case, you typically put the stems of tarragon and chervil in the reduction itself. You reduce it down so it concentrates the flavor. You refresh it, add a little bit of water. You add that reduction, you strain out the other stuff. You add that to the egg yolks. You mix that over You mix that over a water bath. Usually that's like the old school way. And then you pour in butter gradually. It creates an emulsion. And you just keep mixing it. And that's how you do that. And usually with this, you throw in chopped tarragon and chervil at the end. Typically towards the end because it preserves the green color. If it sits in the sauce for a while, it'll turn brown. Doesn't look as nice. Tastes the same, but you're serving in a nice restaurant. You want it to look good.
Yeah.
And then holidays, it's interesting. I found out someone suggested to me. I don't know why I thought of this, but for Easter, I actually made it in the blender, which makes sense because it's like all you have to do is you throw the eggs in the blender and then you just turn it on, put the butter in, and mixes it evenly. And it's like it's minimal. It's like, well, in school they teach you to do everything by hand because they want you to understand the technique. But as a matter of practical purpose, you can just do it in a blender. You can even do the hand mixer if you have those because it's more practical. It holds the emulsion better. It whips air into it, which gives it the nice texture. It's just better. Typically, too, they use clarified butter. I think that's the old school French way, but you can use whole butter as well. I've also seen brown butter hollandaise where you brown the butter so the milk solids sink to the bottom of the pan so the butter itself gets brown. It gets kind of this nutty flavor. You can make hollandaise with that, too. Not as common, but I've seen people do it. Steak frites is like one of the staples there. What kind of sucks now though, they used to give you both the butter and the sauce. Now they have you pick one. I don't know if they're trying to save money or what the deal is. I usually get that though. It's decent value, and then they have some other steaks too, like filet and other things. A little pricier, but this is a good standby.
All right.
Thoughts or comments?
That sounds to be one of the more like higher level that we have SS level sauce. We're talking about the maitre d' hotel butter here, the maitre d' butter. Because it's a maitre d' of the hotel, maitre d'hotel. So
like
master of the hotel. Master of the hotel is butter. Yeah, maitre d' is butter. With this one, this is one of those things where these are the things for me. One of the interesting things that I have is this is the kind of thing where it's like, okay, if I'm aware that that's the process of making this, the chances of me ever making that at home are rather low, or I might do it like once in my lifetime. So that's the kind of thing where if I'm there at a place and I'm like, okay, I'm getting a steak, you have hollandaise sauce, as Steven mentioned, you just throw that in a blender. It's like 2 ingredients. Versus this is the kind of situation where if you're aware of something like this, you say, okay, I must try this because the chances of you being able to make something anywhere close to that level or finding it in other places, now that's going to be higher. So that's the kind of thing where it's like, I think when you go to a restaurant and you spend your money on getting something like that, you're really getting the full value out of out of the skills of the people out there, out of the privilege or the time preference of having the situation where you sit there and somebody else cooks for you rather than you being in there so you can come and spend those hours to make like a small dish of thing that you're going to have in like one steak. Okay, yeah, you can make it as you mentioned in a batch and then keep it and have it later, but some of these things, some foods are much better made fresh and you eat them in that time. Some things keep different ways. So this is just part of the knowledge about the foods that you consume, so you can be a more informed consumer-informed, customer-informed, not restaurateur. Restaurateur are the people who run the restaurants. What are the people that you know?
Restaurant patron.
Yeah, I guess.
Dining patron.
Yeah. We'll think of a different. More informed diner. We'll think of something. An eater. I don't know. We'll think of something. Maybe we'll come up some term. But yeah, I think that's some interesting thing to have.
It's funny this with hollandaise because one of my old bosses, he used to work at Tavern on the Green, and that's one of the staples in New York City. For those who don't know, it closed and it reopened. I guess he worked there when it was like kind of in its heyday, and they do crazy volume. Like they feed thousands of people. Like he was telling me, I'm trying to remember if like they started with like 1,000 people a night or something, and that was just reservations. That doesn't include walk-ins, and of course reservations keep growing too. Yeah. It's like. He told me how he dreaded making hollandaise after this place because they had an eggs Benedict on the brunch menu, and he had to make a 20-gallon bucket worth of it. And the thing is, he had to do it. Remember, so one of the challenges with this, as I'm sort of describing, is that it's an emulsion. So the idea is you can't add the butter too quickly because if you do, it'll break the emulsion. Like the water components and the fat components are supposed to combine. That's what holds it together. Lecithin in egg yolks is a natural emulsifier. Some people put mustard in because mustard's an emulsifier too. But he told me you had to do this by hand over a water bath, this huge like bowl. And he's like, if that thing broke, like God help you. So he's like, after that, he's like, I never want to put hollandaise on a menu again. But like I say, I mean, now there's easier ways. Like now you could take the bucket, you could get one of these big it's like not quite a hand mixer, but it's a similar thing but bigger, and you can just put it in the thing and then just push the thing. It's usually like this, and then pour the butter in so it's easier. You could do things like that, and then you have your 20 gallons of hollandaise for service.
Yeah.
But I've never made that much. I mean, I've made maybe like a small bowl's worth, but I've never done like that.
Cool. Yeah. So anything else you want to say about this?
No, I think that we talk about favorite dishes. I wouldn't say this is my favorite dishes, but it's like one of those I get pretty frequently because it's a good staple and it's consistent. Steak is well done. The fries they make in house. I like béarnaise, so it's nice. Next few times I might try some of the other stuff though, because some of these dishes I've had a few times now, and it's like obviously I'd recommend them, but it's like I don't want to get the same thing every time.
This is something that's permanent on their menu.
Yeah.
That if you go, it's like a thing where it's decent. So, is there anything in particular that you haven't had that you think you'll try? And if he tries more things, we'll come and do additions to these. Maybe you'll wait until he racks up a few, or we might even just do shorter ones where you're just talking about one dish at a time. Because as we're going, we got one more dessert left to finish off. We've been doing this for almost 2 hours now. I think we might divide these into two. We're still working on this process, so we'll figure it out to do. So is there something in mind that you have that you haven't tried yet, or you've heard somebody has tried that was good that gives us a little teaser of what else is there that has caught your eye that's not included in this list?
So this is funny. I talked to both my friend Abram and also one of my lady friends, Trish. She's this little Brazilian lady. She wants to do the côte de boeuf. Now, côte de boeuf, for those people who don't know, it's a really big steak. I think theirs are like 32 ounce, and they serve it with the bone marrow too. And I think there's a side of potatoes as well. She said she wants to do that. She's like, oh, we can go there sometime. I was like, you want to eat that? Because she's this like little woman. She's like, oh, I would definitely share that with you. I'm like, okay, we can do it. I'm like, if I get that, like, that's all I'm going to eat for that day. And then I told Abram, and Abram wanted to do the same thing, where he and I went yesterday to a kosher place. They had the same thing, another côte de boeuf, 32 ounces. And we thought about it, but there was a lot of good stuff on the menu, and he wanted to try a bunch of other dishes. So we're like, okay, we'll come back another time and get it. But again, that's one of those things. Like, if I get that, that's all I'm eating, because it's like 16 ounces a person plus sides, and it's like you gotta come with, like, it's 2 people who can eat a lot, or like 3 or 4 people, and just divide it up. It's a lot.
That's another suggestion to people. If you're going to go to a certain restaurant, it's some food that you haven't had, they're putting quality into it. Don't just treat it like. Treat it like a partner, or a somebody you really care about. Treat it as a good experience. Don't just try to treat it as a side, something on the side, some side fling where you're just like, oh, I'm just going to just pop in, or like, oh, I'm going to eat like all this food before you go in there full. If you're going to go to some of these places, it's good to go there when you're actually feeling some hunger. Even a situation where try and just not eat all day and see if you go in there and actually are hungry enough, and also just pace yourself. Don't feel like you have to order something we've mentioned before. And I think this is a good intro to the last one, because this is something Stephen had mentioned, wanted to try this before, but he never really had any space for this, because as he mentioned, the food's been really rich. So just the other day, he finally said, okay, let me go out and have this. That's going to be the actual dessert that we talked about. But sometimes you can go to a restaurant and say, I'm just going to go get an appetizer and jump right to dessert. Sometimes you say, maybe I just thought about getting this dessert from there. I'm going to get the dessert first. And if I still feel hungry, maybe I'll get an entree. So this is the kind of thing. Don't feel like just because you go, you have to get all 3 and you have to feed yourself in that sense. And when you actually have the food for the food itself, and eat to satiation. Satiation. Is it satiation? Or is it satiation?
Satiation, I think.
Yeah, eat to satiation.
I'm satiated. Yeah.
And not eat to like the whole like Thanksgiving, like all like unbuckle the belt buckle type thing. It's some of these places. There's definitely places for that. There's buffets and things like that where sometimes you just go and it's like one of my friends used to say. One of my friends, Aaron, this guy from DC, he went to like DC Dunbar. I was playing football with him in West Virginia, and he was telling me about the trips that their football team used to take to play different teams and things like that, normally in the countryside and things like that, and in more rural areas. And sometimes they'd go to a buffet, and then they'd be like, and they would talk to certain players who they knew this player was not going to play the next day. It was like a bench player or something. And he was like, man, you ain't going to play today. You might as well just eat up. Like, kill yourself. Kill yourself. He said, like, you just go there, you just feed yourself until you're just bloated. Because if you're going to play the next day, you don't want to be too heavy. But there's times and places for that. But I think with some of these restaurants, and sometimes it's just like, hey, you go there and you eat to feel the food and spread your time. Don't go when you feel like, okay, It's a situation where I have to be there in and out in an hour. Some of these places you literally go, and that's one of my favorite experiences in Italy was going with some friends and going to this small town. I think it was a group that we met via couch surfing because Italy was living in Rome at this time. Rome, as you would imagine, is a really big place for couch surfing because a lot of tourism coming through there. But we went to some couch surfing group in some small little town outside of Rome proper, and they had this whole like Italian meal thing, and it was like a 6 hour dinner or so. It was just like these benches outside, there's music playing, people talking, moving between benches, and it's like in Italy, some places it's a very broken down meal. It's like just the salad. It's like plain salad. Then just the soup comes out. Then just the soup. Then it's just the meat, like literally just the meat. Then just like some starch comes out. Then just the, like maybe some basic dessert, and then after that some coffee or tea or some some grappa or some things like that after. So it's like it's almost like every hour there's like some kind of single meal brought out, but it's a process. And with some of these things, I think you enjoy them in that thing, the presentation, the ambiance, the other things, and the things to actually take in with that. Yeah.
Well, I was gonna say I don't know if I told you this story, but I'm trying to eat earlier, but also not eat as much. And like the people who work at Minetta always laugh because they're like, "Oh yeah, you always pace yourself," and I'm like, "I know," because I've it's that whole that's one of the dark sides of eating of ordering food when you're hungry. Like everything looks good and like it's easy to like your eyes are bigger than your stomach and all this. I went there late one night and I had both the bone marrow and the steak frites. I only had 2 glasses of wine. I felt like it felt worse than a hangover the next day. Like I was like, it was just like, you go to sleep with like all that stuff in your stomach. Like I felt like death and I'm like, yeah, I can't do this again. So it's like, what I'll do is I'll go there. I'll be like, I'll have one thing. I'll see how I feel. And then like something like the lobster is kind of small. So I'm like, all right, I'll order something else. When I went once, I had the 3 appetizers, the vol au vent, the foie gras, and the tartare, but each one is like that big. So it's like, it's not that much food, but it's like I try to pace myself accordingly. And, I always come back like going to the place with Abram yesterday, like, oh, we'll come back and get the Cote de Boeuf and try other things. Like he got like 2 appetizers and like a small entree. Like I like doing stuff like that, but like, as far as we know, I mean, these places will be there. So it's like you can go back and get other stuff. Like
Yeah.
you don't have to order everything at once.
That is a good. That's a good simple thing there that I didn't think of. Just if you're ordering, sometimes you don't have to. I know some restaurants they want you to put your full order in ahead of time. They normally do the dessert after you've eaten, but sometimes just order the appetizer and then see how you feel after. That could be a smart thing. Instead of ordering appetizer and the meal, just have the table order the appetizer, get the appetizer. And I know normally in some places they know the meal takes longer, so you order the appetizer. The appetizer takes like 15 minutes to cook, and then the meal normally takes 30 minutes. So you order them at the same time, then you still only 15 minutes between the meals. But if you have more of a longer time between what you're eating, and it could be good to actually order the appetizer and then order your meal after you've had the appetizer to get a better idea. That's something to consider. I know it won't be something available to anyone, but if you have a more flexible schedule and more control over that, you can make the time for that, and that might improve or alter your experience dining out and things like that. But definitely one thing is just sometimes just go for dessert. You don't have to get everything else. Sometimes start with a dessert. That's one of the suggestions that I have. If you have nothing else to say, tell us about this dessert, because I think we'll try to put the video up of this so we can see what it is.
I was going to sort of add to your point, from a front of the house perspective, when people do things like that, like, oh, we'll just have the appetizer, we'll decide on the entrees. I do warn people for certain, like I have, I mean, I'm not working now, but when in the past, what you do is you do warn people like this takes at least half an hour. So be warned, if you don't order this now, it's going to be a bit of a wait, just to let you know. Because it's also, you have to factor in how long the dish takes. Plus, if the kitchen's backed up, they're not going to put it out exactly in that time. So it's like, it's good to sort of forewarn people. Then if they get a little annoyed, be like, look, I'm just trying to give you a heads up because I don't want you to get it. And then be like, hey, where's my food? And it's like, well, the dish takes that long. I mean, I can't speed that up. It's just the nature of the dish takes that long.
Good. That's a good addition, and that's why there's some things are done for a reason. That makes perfect sense of why they would do that. And so if you are going to do that, go in there with that knowledge. And Stephen is kind enough to share with us. That's why it's good to have somebody who's familiar with the food industry. So if you're going to do that, ask the waiter, ask somebody there how long the foods take, and they should be able to give you a decent idea of what it is, so you're more prepared about that. Because that is one thing that I find, like, I guess I see it more on the cooking shows. And that also does happen. This is a question to you and the people out there as well. Are you the kind of person who, if you get your dish before everybody else, you start eating? I personally don't mind if people start eating once their food gets there. Like I think it's ridiculous for me to be like, okay, I ordered something that takes longer, and then you're supposed to just wait and let your food go cold because my food isn't here. Like no, just start eating. Like for me I don't get that.
It's funny because like my dad is the type that like when we eat out, his food comes first. He'll be like, "Oh, I don't want to be inconsiderate. I'll wait till the rest of your food gets."
What is that?
But I think he's trying to be polite or he doesn't want to look out of place. I don't know. But I don't know. I think for me, sometimes I wait just out of consideration, but usually it's like the other food comes out like shortly thereafter, so it's not that long. I don't know. It's just like a dining etiquette thing, I suppose. I know some of these really formal events, like they say, if like the president is served, everything runs in line with when he's eating. So if he eats quickly before everyone else, they automatically clear everything and go to the next course. But if he eats slow, like everybody has to wait till he's done. So there's things like that too, if it's like a formal event. But I don't know.
And
I'm sure in
restaurants
Buckingham
try,
Palace it's probably the same thing.
now? How about what happens in the behind in the kitchen and things like that? If a table of four people orders things where the people know that one of the meals is going to take 45 minutes to cook, two of them are 30 minutes, one of them is 20 minutes. Do they in the back then stagger this start cook times, or do they just cook whenever it comes open and take it out, or is there an actual process? Can you actually even, as somebody who's an eater, we'll figure out the term for this, can you go in there and say, can you bring all the food out at the same time? Is there a way to do that where maybe they can keep it in some kind of warmer or some kind of oven to keep it like warm while the other foods are waiting, where you can make that request? What's your thoughts on that? The first question was, well, do they do it themselves or can you request it?
Well, the thing is, I mean, typically you're supposed to ideally get all the dishes to come out at once. I mean, there will be a delay if, like, say something goes wrong, but then you have to explain to the diners what happened. Like, let's say a steak gets overcooked, and then it's sorry, we have to fire a new one. You know, yours is coming. We apologize. And then from that's sort of the source of like the front of the house, back of the house tension in restaurants, because then the front of the house gets mad at the kitchen because they're like, look, you're making us look bad, and then the guests complain to the front of the house people, but it's not the front of the house people's fault. So you sort of learn how to put out some of those situations, like you'll comp like a glass of wine or do something like that, like, you know, our apologies. I know it happened to me before, and I think like they gave me free dessert, like, you know, things like that. Okay. You know, you find ways to sort of mitigate those situations. Ideally, everything's supposed to come out at once, but it's like things don't always go according to plan. If somebody orders a time-consuming dish after the fact, you have to explain to them like, look, it's going to be a little longer, and then you can ask the guests like, would you like us to have everything at once, or would you be fine waiting a little bit for your dish? And sometimes people will say, that's fine, I'll wait. Other people say, we'd like it all at once. And then the kitchen just has to stagger it. So it's like you get the thing that takes longer, you get that going first, and then the other things you do towards the end. And when you work in kitchens, you find ways to organize this. Like, okay, something that takes a while, you get that going first, then you get the other things going partway through, and then you try to synchronize it so it comes out at once.
So
and
they normally do that in the kitchen.
Most places have heat lamps. Not all. Like there was a place, Boulay, it's closed now. But they didn't have a heat lamp. They had an open pass, and the food just sat there. So that one challenge with that is the food would get cold sometimes, and that was a frequent complaint. But ideally, the food shouldn't sit under the heat lamp either, because it does kind of deteriorate. And you'll notice like certain sauces, like they'll thicken, they'll form a skin. It's not good. It's like the heat lamp is more the last resort. Like you plate it, then if it has to sit for like 2 to 5 minutes something, it can, and it's not gonna, you know, it'll keep for that time. Yeah.
Okay. Cool. So yeah, now moving on to the dessert, and we shall try. There might be a video, it might just be a picture, but there was a video recorded of this, and this is the Grand Marnier souffle and flambéed at the table.
Sure. So I posted a video on my Instagram. We'll try to find if we can get a way to do it here. It's really nice. To sort of tie it into the last part of the conversation, the souffle does take 20 minutes, and they give you the warning on that. So they explain, if you're going to have an entree in this, we recommend ordering it partway through because it's going to take time, and it's not, you know, it's not like you're going to order it and it'll be out a few minutes later. Some of the other desserts, like the cakes and things, those are already made, so it's just plate up, scoop ice cream, send it out. But because this, you have to bake to order because of the nature of it. Souffle comes from the verb to rise. You know, I think you can tell souffle the way it rises like that. I've never made a souffle myself. They say it's a very delicate process, though. Like, you have to fold egg whites into the dough. It has to be mixed to a certain degree where they retain their air, so then when it bakes it expands. And there's an exact thing to getting it right. They have a chocolate souffle as well as the Grand Marnier one. The Grand Marnier is nice. It's a bit lighter. They dump the Grand Marnier at the table, light it for you. It's really cool. Reminds me of like toasted marshmallows almost on top, like the sugar and stuff. Again, we'll see if we can do that video. It was really nice. It's kind of a bigger thing. They usually recommend it for 2 people, but I mean it is kind of airy too, so it's not like eating like a dense cake. I've had some of their desserts too in the past. I've had like 1 or 2 of them. I haven't taken pictures. Like I say, I'm usually too full by the time dessert comes, so I don't get it. But they have some nice looking desserts. Like they had like a salted chocolate caramel dessert. They had like a coconut cake with sorbet. They had some interesting looking stuff too. But maybe come in another time and try those.
Yeah. No, this again is one of those higher difficulty levels, as you mentioned, with the souffle, getting into rice. So if you're at a place and they have like cakes that still might be tasty in themselves, and the souffle, and you're not like, I must have the cake, this is one of the things that I do suggest. Like if you do find this out there, go ahead and give it a chance to try it, especially when they have it plated in this way with a flambe type of thing. That's a little extra to it.
Definitely. Yeah, some places, I think Les Spolier, where I did my externship, they had a souffle, but it was like a mini one, but it went on the plate last minute. So what they would do is they'd put the batter in these little tins, and then when they fired the dessert plate, what it is like that would go in the oven, that would get hot, and then there would be some cold items on the plate, and the ice cream, they'd put the souffle on, sprinkle some sugar, then ice cream like last minute. Again, if you work in a kitchen, you find ways to do this because you have to sort of streamline it where it's like, there's certain things you lay down in advance because they can sit there. Then like ice cream is last minute because it'll melt, and then cake, like you find a way to time that so it's in the oven, it's baked, it's hot, it goes on the plate, and you have like some hot and cold and in between stuff on the plate, which is nice. Different textures, flavors, and so on. Oh.
Yeah. Is there like a vanilla flavor to this? What's the taste of the souffle itself?
So there's Grand Marnier in the batter itself as well. So it does kind of taste like it's like a lighter. I'm not going to say white cake, but it is like a lighter. It's like probably mostly egg whites, flour, probably some sugar, a little salt, Grand Marnier, and then they finish it at the end with the flambe. So like I say, it kind of reminds me of like a toasted marshmallow or something because the alcohol plus the sugar on top melting, it gets kind of crunchy and nice, and it goes well. Yeah.
All right. Yeah. I think that's it. I think we're at the end. It's gone well. Anything else you want to say about this?
Well, I was going to say.
Go ahead.
Sorry, I was going to say, I noticed too, I didn't get into the wines. They do have some really nice wines there, a lot of good French stuff. I didn't want to focus on that because I wanted to focus on the food for this. If anyone has questions about the wine or anything, of course, we can talk about those as well. But I thought I wanted to focus on the food. I mean, we're already at over 2 hours with just the food. So I figured focus on the food. Maybe we'll touch on wine sometime down the road, but I thought it would distract too much from the food. And this whole conversation would be 3-4 hours. It's too much.
Yeah, because like Stephen himself is a bit of a wine connoisseur, and not just wine, he's a spirits and an adult beverage connoisseur. He's a connoisseur of consumption in a sense. So he can also get into that. And we will have places where we're looking to getting places where we post actual images, release, and I think on those postings we'll have those. But let us know. Let us know if you prefer to just have sections in it and you're willing to listen to it, because there is something in there with a wine pairing. I personally don't drink anymore, so I'm not really into that stuff. And even when I was able to tell this is good wine and this is bad wine, this is good liquor, this is bad liquor. But when you go into like the tones and the taste and things like that and the pairings, that's something I was not able to do. But Stephen most definitely has the knowledge to do this and has done it professionally and things like that. So I think that will be value added. From what I've seen in places, people seem to like that. So let us know how you feel about that on the actual posts on whatever site, probably like chefing it up or something. Whatever, as we build this up, we'll have the location. We'll be letting you know where that's in there, and that will have that as an accompaniment to these things. And I don't know, what else you have to say, Stephen?
That's all I have. I mean, of course, I really recommend the restaurant itself. I mean, I've never been disappointed all the times I've been there, and been going several years now. They kind of know me now. I usually come in by myself, sit at the bar. I talked about going with friends, but I guess, like I say, I mean, timing and trying to coordinate. And it's one of those places I do recommend a reservation because it's popular. So it's like, unless you come in early, it can be kind of tough. But I recommend it. Again, we'll do the price thing too. It's a little pricier. It's not like way up there, but it's like, it's not somewhere you would go like a few times. I go maybe like once a week, but like I wouldn't go all the time because I mean it is a little pricey. But what you pay, I feel it's worth it for sure.
Okay. Yeah. So that's it. What's the ambiance? What's the? I think what do they normally do, like dress code? Like you just go in there like casual, or what's?
So like I say, it's like 1950s style decor. It's like they usually wear like, I think they wear like vests and like bow ties. There's no strict dress code. Like I usually come in like with my polo and shorts on. They don't say anything. I mean, the people at the front usually have suits and stuff, but like there's no strict dress code. It's kind of whatever. I mean, I know a lot of people come in there with suits. I just, I don't really care, I guess, but I usually just sit at the bar by myself, and it's not like, it is a higher end place, but it's not like way up there where I feel like, okay, I need my suit and tie and everything. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
I don't know if we should even include this thing for events. That I don't think we're going to include that. I don't think we're getting kind of people watching this will be thinking of renting out Grand Marnier for like full event. Or do they have any? Do they have delivery or any? We said they don't have a cookbook that you're aware of, but do they have any sort of like? If you're living in New York City, are they involved with like? Can you order stuff delivery from this place?
I think you can actually. I never have, but I think I saw on their website you can order stuff to go. A lot of places have been doing that with the pandemic. So again, the thing with to-go food, especially higher end food, is certain things don't travel well. That's probably a whole talk in of itself.
Mm-hmm.
But if you were to get like the burger or something, or like fries, I mean, you could get, I don't know about the bone marrow, that might not travel too well, but I mean, like even like the pate, I mean, they could put it in a box, put the condiments on the side. Like there are things that travel fine depending what you get, of course.
And also, some of these things, plating is part of the enjoyment of having the meal. But yeah, okay, so that's it. I think. Good to go?
That's all I have. Yeah.
Okay,
right,
so
cool.
thank you very much for listening. I think we might divide this into 2 parts. We'll talk to Steven about this after, and we'll see how this goes. If it's been 2 parts, this is the last part. If it's 1 part, this is the end regardless. And thank you very much for this. We're trying something new with this. We're still not sure of the name. There's a lot more we have in mind. Steven's been to some other places already. He's been doing this for some time. As I mentioned, I'll start compiling a list of places here in Kenya, as well as I have the chef unit up already. I'll leave that down there so you can get some idea of some of the stuff I cook. I think maybe for me on my end, I'll go to more in like cooking certain meals and doing talks about what those meals are and some process. And we'll figure this out. We'll figure this out together. We'll do this together. Anything you want to say to everyone?
That's all I have. I hope you enjoyed it. And again, feel free to leave any feedback, comments, suggestions. Happy to hear them.
Okay. So that's it for me too. And goodbye. Thank you very much, gents, ladies, and everything else in between. Till next time, Steven, stay on after. Goodbye.
Bye-bye.